The flashing red and blue lights of the federal cruisers reflected perfectly against the rented sequins of my husband's mistress. It was 2 in the morning, and my phone was vibrating against my nightstand, shattering the quiet darkness of my bedroom. When I answered, Derek, my husband's closest friend, sounded breathless. His voice cracked into a pathetic whine as he begged me to listen. "Anna, please answer," Derek stammered over the chaotic background noise of sirens and shouting. "Something happened tonight, and it is about you. The feds are swarming the gala. Nathan is in handcuffs." I smiled into the darkness, letting the cool night air wash over me. Nathan thought he was outsmarting a boring housewife, but he had walked blindly into a trap set by a billionaire. My name is Anna. I am 34 years old. If you have ever had to stand up to an arrogant partner who underestimated your worth, drop your age in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to Samantha Told Stories because you will not want to miss how I dismantled his entire life. To understand how my husband ended up facing federal agents in a rented tuxedo, we must rewind exactly 14 days. It was the evening of our 5th wedding anniversary. I sat on the edge of the plush sofa in our Maryland suburban home, listening to the coastal rain lash against the siding. I wore faded heather gray sweatpants and an oversized college shirt. My hair was tied up in a messy knot. Resting on my lap was a sleek black leather portfolio. Inside that portfolio sat a certified cashier's check for $150,000. It was intended to erase the suffocating consumer debt Nathan constantly complained about. Tucked neatly behind that check lay the title to a pristine 50-foot sailboat moored and waiting in the Annapolis harbor. It was the ultimate anniversary surprise, a gift meant to elevate our future together. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11:30. The front deadbolt finally clicked. I heard the sound of keys fumbling before the heavy oak door swung open. Nathan stumbled into the foyer. The heavy scent of aged bourbon mingled instantly with the sickly sweet floral notes of a cheap perfume I did not own. He was 36 years old, a regional director at a local biotech firm, and a man entirely obsessed with projecting a level of wealth he did not possess. He bought tailored suits on credit cards and wore flashy watches he could barely afford. He did not offer an apology for missing our anniversary dinner. He did not offer a greeting. His gaze swept over my unstyled hair, my bare face, and my comfortable clothes. His upper lip curled into a sneer of undisguised contempt. He tossed his wet raincoat carelessly over a chair and let out a dramatic, exhausted sigh, as if my mere presence was draining his energy. "My friends think you are not remarkable enough for me," Nathan stated. The alcohol rendered his cruelty unfiltered. "I spend my days rubbing shoulders with biotech innovators, climbing the corporate ladder, and then I come home to a woman who lacks drive." He gestured vaguely at my outfit and the quiet living room. "You just sit around doing small freelance data projects. You have no ambition. You do not understand the pressure of the real corporate world. My colleagues have wives who run in high society circles and elevate their husbands. You just drag me down. I could do better. I need a separation to find a high society woman who actually fits my trajectory." I sat frozen on the sofa. The leather portfolio suddenly felt incredibly heavy in my hands. The man I had spent 5 years loving, the man I was about to elevate into true financial freedom, was tearing me apart, piece by piece. He took a step closer, delivering his insults with supreme arrogance. He truly believed he was destined for boundless luxury and viewed me as the heavy anchor preventing him from setting sail. To punctuate his grand, arrogant exit, Nathan took a step forward and swung his expensive leather shoe. He intentionally kicked my favorite fuzzy slippers out the open front door, sending them tumbling onto the rain-soaked muddy porch. Seeing that mud spatter across the fabric pulled me backward in time. A decade ago, I was 24 years old, huddled in a damp, unfinished basement near the Naval Academy. The concrete floor flooded during high tide. I survived on cheap instant ramen, my eyes burning from the harsh glare of dual monitors as I relentlessly wrote the proprietary encryption code that secured my first $50 million contract with the Department of Defense. I knew what genuine grinding ambition looked like. Nathan only knew how to lease the illusion of it. He stood in the foyer, crossing his arms, waiting for my reaction. He wanted messy tears. He expected a desperate plea for him to stay, a frantic promise that I would buy better clothes and try harder to fit seamlessly into his superficial world. I looked at the man pacing frantically in front of me and realized I did not know him at all. Nathan was not a driven professional weighed down by debt. He was a shallow, entitled fraud. He was a parasite, feeding off my quiet stability so he could play the role of a wealthy titan in public. Every late night at the office, every canceled dinner date, every complaint about his highly stressful job was just an elaborate cover for his insatiable vanity. I did not shed a single tear. I did not scream. I did not defend my hard work or remind him of the countless times I paid his credit card minimums when his bank account dipped dangerously into the red. My mind went entirely quiet. The emotional bond I nurtured for 5 years snapped, instantly replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. If he had walked through that door 10 minutes earlier and smiled, I would have handed him total financial freedom on a silver platter. I would have erased his debts entirely. I would have handed him the keys to a luxury vessel. His cruel, arrogant timing was truly the greatest anniversary gift he could have ever given me. It saved me from making a monumental financial mistake. I observed his flushed face, his expensive but poorly fitted suit, the way he puffed out his chest, trying to look imposing. He was pathetic. He genuinely believed his middle management salary made him an untouchable king. He believed he was outgrowing me. I stood up, maintaining unwavering eye contact, and delivered the only response he ever needed to hear. "Then go find better," Nathan scoffed, rolling his eyes as if he were dealing with an unreasonable child. He grabbed his coat from the chair, snatched his keys off the console table, and announced he was crashing at a downtown hotel. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him. The lock clicked into place. I stood in the center of the living room, listening to the engine of his sedan fade down the street. He thought he had just discarded a boring pedestrian freelance data analyst. He had no idea he had just unleashed the anonymous founder and billionaire chief executive officer of Aegis Protocol. The moment the taillights of Nathan's leased luxury sedan faded into the dark Maryland downpour, the stifling illusion of my suburban marriage evaporated. The quiet hum of the empty house felt different now. It was no longer a shared sanctuary, but a command center awaiting activation. I turned away from the foyer and walked directly into my home office. On the surface, the room looked exactly like the workspace of a modest freelance data analyst. A simple oak desk sat near the window, holding a standard commercial monitor and a few scattered spiral notebooks. I reached beneath the desk, pressing my thumb against a biometric scanner hidden seamlessly within the wood grain. A secondary, heavily encrypted terminal whirred to life, bathing the room in a sharp blue glow. I sat in the ergonomic chair and opened the black leather portfolio resting on my lap. The certified cashier's check for $150,000 stared back at me. It bore the seal of a prominent bank, crisp and pristine, representing a fortune that could have instantly erased the suffocating consumer debt my husband constantly lamented. Behind it lay the heavy notarized deed to a 50-foot luxury sailboat, a vessel I had purchased outright to fulfill his lifelong dream of navigating the Chesapeake Bay. I ran my fingertips over the thick paper, feeling the textured ink. I did not shed a tear for the future we had planned. I simply reached over to the heavy-duty industrial shredder sitting in the corner of the room. I flipped the power switch. I fed the cashier's question into the steel teeth. The machine emitted a satisfying guttural grind as the fortune was instantly reduced to useless confetti. Next went the glossy sailboat deed. I watched the luxury dream turn into paper ribbons, dropping into the clear plastic bin below. The physical destruction of his anniversary gifts was merely the prologue. The true execution required digital precision. I turned to my encrypted terminal and initiated a secure voice protocol to Vaughn. Vaughn was my lead corporate attorney, a razor-sharp litigator who operated out of a high-security office in Bethesda. He managed the labyrinth of blind trusts, shell companies, and impenetrable legal firewalls that kept Aegis Protocol and my identity as its founder entirely invisible to the public. He answered on the second ring, his tone alert and strictly professional despite the late hour. "We are initiating a total financial lockdown," I instructed, keeping my voice steady and devoid of any emotional tremor. "Sever Nathan's access to the joint checking accounts immediately. Leave exactly $2,000 in the primary ledger so he can cover his hotel incidentals for the weekend, but freeze every secondary credit card bearing my name. I want a complete firewall erected between my civilian freelance accounts and the Aegis corporate infrastructure. Verify that the blind trusts holding the Maryland estate and my personal equity remain entirely undetectable. Consider the perimeter secured," Vaughn replied, the rapid clacking of a mechanical keyboard echoing over the encrypted line. What triggered the sudden protocol activation, Nathan decided. "He requires a woman of higher social standing to match his boundless ambition," I said, an icy smile touching my lips. "He requested a separation. He wants to go find someone better." A low, dark chuckle vibrated through the speaker. He just threw away a winning lottery ticket because he did not like the color of the paper, Vaughn noted. "I will have the divorce petitions drafted by morning. We will offer him zero spousal support and force him to assume his own debts. Before we finalize the separation paperwork, I have another task." I continued, my mind shifting toward the larger operational strategy. "Connect me with Elias." Elias was my chief compliance officer, a former federal cybersecurity director who monitored the vast network of government contracts and secondary vendors tied to Aegis Protocol. The call clicked as Vaughn bridged the connection. Elias answered with his usual quiet intensity. "I need you to run a discrete, localized audit on a regional biotech firm operating out of Annapolis," I told Elias, providing the name of the company, where Nathan served as a regional director. "I suspect there is a fatal compliance glitch hiding somewhere in their software architecture, specifically regarding how they handle federal grant allocations. Pull their operational data and cross-reference it with our internal security parameters. Do not flag anything officially yet. Just map the vulnerabilities and leave the back door open. I want to see exactly what kind of digital footprint my husband is leaving behind when he thinks nobody is watching." "Understood," Elias confirmed. "I will have the preliminary threat assessment on your secure dashboard before sunrise." I ended the call, the blue screen fading to black. The financial and legal perimeters were now tightly secured. My massive cybersecurity empire remained an untouchable ghost, while Nathan was effectively stranded in the open with frozen credit cards. But there was still the matter of his physical presence in my home. I left the office and walked upstairs to the master suite. The walk-in closet was divided evenly, but his side was a chaotic display of unearned vanity. Rows of custom-tailored Italian wool suits, expensive silk ties, and designer leather shoes lined the shelves, all purchased on high-interest credit accounts he expected me to quietly pay off. I walked past the velvet-lined watch display and grabbed a box of cheap, heavy-duty black garbage bags from the utility room. I did not fold his garments. I did not organize them by season or color. I grabbed handfuls of expensive wool and shoved them ruthlessly into the thick plastic bags. I threw his polished leather shoes in with his silk ties, forcing the plastic to stretch and strain under the awkward weight. I packed hated identity into 6 bulging trash bags. I dragged them one by one down the grand staircase, the heavy plastic thudding against the polished wood steps. I opened the front door. The coastal storm was still raging, the wind driving sheets of freezing rain across the brick driveway. I hauled the bags onto the uncovered edge of the front porch, tossing them carelessly onto the wet stone. The rain immediately began to pound against the thin plastic, seeping through the unsealed gaps. Let the high society executive carry his precious wardrobe out of the mud. I locked the deadbolt, turned off the foyer lights, and went upstairs to sleep. I rested deeper and more peacefully than I had in 5 long years. The next morning broke with crisp, blinding sunlight, clearing away the remnants of the storm. I stood at the kitchen island, dressed in my familiar, comfortable sweatpants and a plain white shirt. I was sipping a freshly brewed cup of dark roast coffee, the bitter warmth grounding my senses. At exactly 9 o'clock, the security chime on my control panel echoed through the house. I pulled up the exterior camera feed on my tablet. A pristine white luxury SUV pulled into the driveway. Nathan stepped out of the driver's side, wearing a crisp, casual blazer and a smug, self-satisfied expression. The passenger door opened, and his new reality stepped out onto the brick pavement. Harper was 24 years old, a local lifestyle influencer whose entire existence revolved around curated, aesthetic perfection. She wore oversized designer sunglasses, towering boots, and held her smartphone high in the air, actively recording her arrival at my home for her digital audience. I tapped a discrete icon on my tablet, silently activating the internal audio and video recording network built into the smart home security architecture. Every word spoken in the foyer and living room would now be captured and archived on a secure server. The front door unlocked. Nathan swaggered into the entryway, expecting to find an emotionally devastated, weeping housewife begging for a second chance. He expected me to be surrounded by tissues, paralyzed by the loss of his incredible presence. Instead, he found me leaning casually against the marble kitchen island, holding a ceramic mug, watching him with an expression of profound, chilling boredom. Harper trailed closely behind him, lowering her sunglasses to scrutinize the interior of my house. She wrinkled her nose, looking at my simple attire with undisguised pity. "Wow," she muttered, her voice grating and artificially sweet. "You really were not kidding, Nathan. This place is so remarkably average. It feels like a waiting room. I cannot believe you tolerated such a restrictive environment for so long. A man with your trajectory needs a space that actually reflects success." Nathan chuckled, placing a proprietary hand on Harper's lower back. "I told you, babe. I was suffocating here. I am finally breaking free of the dead weight." He turned his gaze to me, puffing out his chest to project maximum authority. "I came to gather my essentials. We are moving forward quickly. Harper and I have extensive plans today, looking at premier real estate downtown, properties that actually match my earning potential." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. I needed him to articulate his betrayal perfectly for the legal record. "So just to be entirely clear," I said, keeping my tone mild and conversational, "you brought a 24-year-old influencer into my home the morning after our anniversary. Are you officially stating that our marriage is over, Nathan?" He stepped forward, his ego inflating with every word. "Harper is not just an influencer, she is my future. And yes, we are entirely done. I am leaving you permanently. I am officially vacating this depressing suburban trap to build a life with someone who actually understands elite success. We have been seeing each other for months, and she is exactly the high-caliber partner I require." I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch out, allowing his brazen admission of prolonged infidelity and marital abandonment to permanently encode onto my secure server. "And you have no intention of honoring our marital commitments?" I pressed gently, baiting the trap further. "You are leaving this household to finance a luxury lifestyle with her." Harper scoffed, linking her arm through his. He is not leaving you, honey. He is escaping you. He deserves a woman who can elevate his personal brand, not someone who drinks coffee in sweatpants at 9 in the morning. We are leaving. Come on, Nathan, grab your things so we can go to the yacht club. Nathan smirked, thoroughly enjoying his perceived victory. Grab my suits from the closet, he ordered, pointing a finger at me. I have networking events to attend this week. I set my ceramic mug down on the marble counter. Your suits are already packed, I replied, gesturing toward the front window. I placed them outside last night. Nathan frowned, his smug facade faltering. He spun around and marched back to the open front door, stepping out onto the porch. Harper followed him, her phone still recording. I watched through the window as Nathan stared in absolute horror at the 6 bulging, rain-soaked garbage bags sitting in a muddy puddle near the flower beds. The cheap plastic had torn in several places, exposing the saturated, ruined fabric of his expensive Italian wool jackets and silk ties to the harsh morning elements. You threw my clothes in the mud! Nathan shouted, his voice cracking with sudden, uncontrolled rage. Those are custom garments. You are a spiteful, pathetic woman. You are going to pay for this. I leaned against the doorframe, watching him frantically attempt to lift a tearing garbage bag, his pristine shoes sinking into the wet dirt. I already paid for them, Nathan, I said quietly. Now take your trash and get off my property. I closed the heavy oak door and slid the deadbolt firmly into place, cutting off his furious shouting. I walked back to the kitchen island and tapped my tablet, ending the recording. I seamlessly uploaded the pristine audio file containing his explicit confession of infidelity and abandonment directly to Vaughn's secure legal folder. The divorce file was now armed with lethal, undeniable ammunition. He thought he had delivered a crushing blow to my self-esteem. He had no idea he had just handed me the exact weapon required to dismantle him. Now that his physical presence was eradicated from my home, it was time to turn my attention to his digital footprint and the fatal compliance glitch Elias was currently mapping in the shadows. With the muddy porch finally empty, the silence of the suburban house wrapped around me like a tailored suit. I carried my empty coffee mug back to the kitchen, rinsed the ceramic clean, and returned to my secure terminal. The role of the weeping spouse was officially shelved. It was time to dissect the digital ghost my husband left behind. I bypassed our standard residential router entirely, establishing a direct, encrypted tunnel to my corporate servers in Bethesda. As a defense contractor, dismantling hidden networks is not just a skill I possess, it is the exact foundation upon which I built an untouchable empire. I typed a string of command prompts, bypassing the superficial passwords Nathan thought were secure. He always used predictable variations of his college fraternity and his birth year. It was genuinely insulting how little effort he invested in guarding his secrets. I watched his personal firewall crumble under my keystrokes, granting me unrestricted access to his entire cloud storage. The screen flooded with lines of green operational data. Elias had already delivered the preliminary threat assessment on the Maryland biotech firm where Nathan served as a regional director. I routed the firm's financial ledgers through my proprietary decryption software. I was searching for the hidden consumer debt he constantly complained about, the unpaid credit cards and the secret expenditures funding Harper's flashy influencer lifestyle. What I found was infinitely more sinister. I traced a series of highly irregular vendor payments. Nathan was not just swiping corporate credit cards for fancy dinners and luxury hotel stays. He was routing federal grant money into a phantom consulting entity he had established just 4 months prior. The capital was flowing from government subsidies designed for critical biomedical research straight into a shadow account. My eyes narrowed as I tracked the origin of those specific federal grants. I cross-referenced the contract identification numbers with my own internal databases. A chilling, razor-sharp realization washed over me. The biotech firm was a Tier 2 subcontractor. They did not receive their federal funding directly from the government. They received it from a primary contractor who oversaw the entire defense logistics supply chain. I pulled up the primary vendor identification block. The name glaring on the screen was Aegis Protocol. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the glowing monitor. My husband, the man who had just stood in my foyer and called my career uninspired, was actively embezzling funds from my own company. Aegis Protocol had awarded his firm a highly restricted logistics contract, and Nathan was quietly siphoning those exact dollars to buy designer bags and fund weekend getaways with a 24-year-old. He was unknowingly stealing from the very woman he deemed too average to stand by his side. The poetic irony was staggering. I dug deeper into the shadow account. I uncovered a digital receipt from a high-end jeweler in Annapolis. The invoice detailed a $25,000 diamond necklace purchased on the exact same afternoon he had stood in our entryway and insulted my appearance. He had used my company's money to decorate his mistress while kicking my slippers into the rain. The stolen federal money was not sitting idle. It was being rapidly pooled for a staggering down payment. I opened a separate folder labeled with a prominent coastal zip code. It contained property deeds and real estate listings for a sweeping $3 million waterfront estate on the Chesapeake Bay. He was trying to buy a luxury compound featuring a private, deep-water dock, floor-to-ceiling windows, and custom marble countertops. He needed this architectural trophy to secure Harper's affection and project the image of a titan. But the embezzled funds were only enough to cover a fraction of the purchase price. To cover the remaining balance, Nathan was applying for a highly volatile commercial bridge loan from a predatory private equity syndicate. Just as I was mapping the lending syndicate's corporate structure, the heavy deadbolt on the front door clicked. My pulse spiked. I had not armed the exterior alarm yet. Heavy, urgent footsteps echoed in the foyer. Nathan had returned. I had fractions of a second to act. I slammed my hand onto a hidden panic button mounted beneath my desk. The encrypted Aegis Protocol interface instantly vanished, replaced by a mundane, brightly colored spreadsheet tracking basic grocery expenses and utility bills. I grabbed a pen and hunched over a spiral notebook just as the home office door swung open. Nathan stood in the doorway breathless, his tailored jacket slightly damp from the lingering morning mist. He ignored my presence entirely, his eyes darting toward the bookshelf where he kept a vintage silver watch. He marched across the room, snatching the timepiece off the wood. He strapped it to his wrist, projecting an aura of immense self-importance. He caught me staring at the computer monitor, his eyes narrowed, analyzing the scene. I immediately softened my posture, allowing my shoulders to slump. I let a look of helpless confusion wash over my face. "Nathan?" I asked, keeping my voice small and hesitant. "Since you are here, do you know how to reset the primary router? My freelance portal keeps dropping the connection and I cannot figure out the administrator password." Nathan let out a harsh, patronizing scoff. He rolled his eyes, adjusting his cuffs with an air of profound superiority. "I do not have time to hold your hand through basic internet troubleshooting. Call your service provider. Figure it out yourself. You have all day to sit around in sweatpants anyway." He turned on his heel and marched out of the office. The front door slammed a second time. The engine of his leased SUV roared to life and quickly faded down the street. I dropped the pen onto the desk. The timid housewife facade dissolved the instant the engine noise disappeared. I pressed the biometric scanner again, restoring the encrypted defense network to my screen. I returned to the commercial bridge loan application Nathan had submitted to the private equity firm. Predatory lenders do not hand over $3 million to a mid-level biotech director based on phantom consulting income. They demand hard, tangible assets. They require ironclad collateral that they can seize the moment a payment is missed. I reviewed Nathan's asset declaration. His wealth was a complete optical illusion. His luxury cars were leased. His tailored suits were financed. His bank accounts were drained. He possessed zero actual equity. There was only one tangible asset tied to his name that held enough value to satisfy a shadow lender: the Maryland suburban home we currently shared. The house was fully paid off. I had purchased it with cash years ago, but in a gesture of early marital trust, I had placed both of our names on the deed. I read the lending requirements highlighted in red text at the bottom of the digital application. To leverage a primary marital residence, the lender required notarized signatures from both spouses. Nathan needed my explicit documented consent to risk the house. He knew I would never agree to leverage my home so he could buy a waterside compound for his mistress. There was only one logical path forward for a man blinded by his own narcissism. He was going to forge my signature. He believed I was too overwhelmed by heartbreak to monitor our property records. The arrogant fool was preparing to commit felony forgery and federal wire fraud against a billionaire defense contractor. I leaned toward the glowing monitor, a sharp, predatory thrill coursing through my veins. The chessboard was set, and my husband was eagerly moving his pieces directly into a fatal snare. His ambition was about to become his own executioner. The heavy brass knocker on my front door echoed through the quiet suburban house, breaking the steady rhythm of my afternoon focus. I did not rush to answer. I set my coffee mug on the kitchen counter and tapped the security interface on my tablet. The high-definition exterior camera feed illuminated the screen, revealing two figures standing on my porch. My mother-in-law, Diane, stood rigid, her posture tight with aristocratic impatience. She wore a tailored camel coat and a string of pearls that had been in her husband Charles's family for 3 generations. Next to her stood my sister-in-law, Gemma, tapping a designer boot against the wet brick. Gemma hid her eyes behind oversized sunglasses despite the overcast Maryland sky. They were a pair of women who survived entirely on the illusion of generational wealth, deeply convinced that their last name commanded immediate obedience across the eastern seaboard. I smoothed the fabric of my simple cotton sweater, ensuring my appearance matched the pedestrian narrative they expected. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the oak door open. Diane did not offer a greeting. She did not ask how I was coping with the sudden collapse of my marriage. She pushed past me into the foyer, bringing a suffocating wave of heavy floral perfume into my home. Gemma followed close behind, her sharp heels clicking a rapid, hostile tempo against the hardwood floor. They marched directly into the living room, surveying the space as if evaluating a property scheduled for a swift demolition. "We need to discuss your exit strategy," Diane stated, turning to face me. Her tone was sharp and stripped of any false familial warmth. Nathan informed us of the separation. Given the circumstances, Gemma and I felt it was our duty to come here and ensure you handle this transition without causing an unnecessary spectacle. I stood near the entryway of the living room, clasping my hands in front of me. I adopted the physical stance of a terrified, cornered woman, letting my shoulders slump just a fraction. I am still processing everything I said, keeping my voice quiet and unsteady. Nathan only left 2 days ago. This is my home, Diane. I am not planning an exit strategy today. Gemma let out a harsh, mocking laugh. She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes filled with unyielding disdain. This is not your home, Anna. This is a house Nathan provided for you. You have spent 5 years anchoring my brother to a life of sheer mediocrity. Look at you. She gestured lazily at my faded jeans and plain sweater. You dress like a college student running errands. You have zero ambition. My brother is a rising star in the regional biotech sector, and you expect him to bring a woman wearing cheap cotton to exclusive charity dinners? It is genuinely embarrassing. Diane stepped closer, holding her leather handbag tightly against her waist. Gemma is right, Anna. You must understand that a man of Nathan's caliber requires a partner who can elevate his status. We met Harper yesterday. She is a breath of fresh air. She possesses a keen understanding of high society networking. She is the exact upgrade my son needs to secure his trajectory in the corporate world. You simply lack the pedigree to walk beside him. They stood in my living room, praising a 24-year-old influencer who was currently helping my husband spend stolen federal funds. They believed Nathan was a towering success, a biotech genius destined for wealth. They did not know his tailored suits were financed on credit, or that his upcoming real estate acquisition was built entirely on a foundation of severe federal wire fraud. We expect you to vacate the premises by the end of the month. Diane continued issuing the demand with the chilling confidence of a feudal lord. Nathan requires this property to maintain his localized assets while he finalizes his new estate on the Chesapeake Bay. Harper has already expressed interest in redesigning this living room. It will serve as a wonderful secondary investment property once they are settled. You need to gather your personal belongings and leave quietly. I maintained a flawless, polite silence. I did not point out that the deed to this house was secured entirely with my cash. I did not mention that the security system, silently running in the background, was capturing every single second of their trespass. The hidden cameras embedded in the crown molding recorded high-resolution video, while the dual microphones registered every vicious insult. They were freely documenting their intent to force me out of my own home to accommodate my husband's mistress. In the realm of legal warfare, arrogant enemies who willingly record their own malice are a true gift. "You cannot simply demand that I leave," I whispered, playing the desperate victim to perfection. "I have nowhere to go. My freelance data contracts do not pay enough to secure a new lease on such short notice. I need time." Diane sighed, a dramatic, theatrical sound meant to convey profound exhaustion. She unclasped her designer handbag and withdrew a slim, leather-bound checkbook. She walked over to the marble kitchen island, uncapped a gold fountain pen, and began to write. The scratching of the nib against the paper filled the tense silence of the room. She tore the check from the ledger and slid it across the cold marble surface toward me. I picked up the slip of paper. It was a personal check written out for $2,000. "Consider that a charitable donation from the family," Diane sneered, looking at me as if I were a stray dog begging for scraps. "Use it to rent a cheap apartment in Baltimore. The gritty industrial aesthetic over there is much more your speed. Annapolis is far too refined for someone with your pedestrian tastes. Take the money, pack your bags, and disappear." I held the $2,000 check between my fingers. This tiny, insignificant piece of paper represented the entirety of their empathy. It was a tangible artifact of their supreme arrogance. I did not tear it up. I did not throw it back in her face. I neatly folded the check and slipped it into the front pocket of my jeans. I intended to keep it safe. A check like this was not a financial lifeline. It was a trophy I planned to utilize when the time was right. "Thank you, Diane," I said, keeping my gaze lowered. "I appreciate your generosity." Gemma stepped forward, clearly dissatisfied that I had not burst into hysterical tears. "Do not think you can take this money and then drag my brother through a messy public divorce," she warned, her voice dropping to a threatening pitch. "If you attempt to contest the separation, or if you dare to ask for a single penny of alimony, we will destroy you. My family knows every influential board member and municipal leader in this county. We will blacklist you from every freelance contract in the state. We will ruin your professional reputation so thoroughly you will never work in Maryland again." I looked up at Gemma, allowing a very small, vacant smile to touch my lips. "I understand perfectly, Gemma," I replied. "I do not want a messy battle. I just want to move forward." Diane nodded, satisfied that her campaign of intimidation had yielded the desired surrender. "See that you do. We will have Nathan's attorney send over the relinquishment forms by Friday. Ensure they are signed promptly. Without waiting for a response, Diane and Gemma turned and marched back toward the foyer. The heavy floral perfume lingered in the air as they let themselves out. The oak door clicked shut, leaving me standing alone in the quiet kitchen. The moment their car engine faded down the street, my posture straightened. The trembling in my hands ceased instantly. The terrified, compliant housewife vanished, replaced by the relentless chief executive officer of Aegis Protocol. I pulled the folded check from my pocket and placed it gently on the marble counter. Diane and Gemma thought they had just executed a masterful display of power. They believed they had effectively intimidated a weak, resourceless woman into abandoning a prime piece of real estate. They felt invincible, entirely convinced that their family name and Nathan's fabricated success shielded them from any real consequences. But their profound ignorance was their ultimate vulnerability. Diane and Charles did not manage their own retirement portfolio. 5 years ago, as Nathan's ego began to swell, he convinced his aging parents to grant him full power of attorney over their finances. He promised to use his brilliant biotech connections to double their retirement yields. Diane trusted her golden boy implicitly. She handed him the keys to their entire financial existence, including the deed to their sprawling, comfortable retirement estate located in the exclusive neighborhoods of Bethesda. What Diane did not know, and what my digital audit had revealed just hours ago, was that Nathan was desperate. The predatory private equity syndicate required massive collateral to underwrite the $3 million loan for his new Chesapeake Bay compound. Nathan knew my forged signature on our marital home would not provide enough equity to satisfy the shadow lenders. He needed a secondary layer of security. To bridge the gap, Nathan was actively using his power of attorney to quietly slip his parents' Bethesda estate into the collateral schedules. He was cross-collateralizing his mother's safe haven to fund a luxury playground for his mistress. Diane had just stood in my kitchen handing me a pity check and demanding I move to a cheap apartment, completely unaware that her own son was currently signing her house away to a ruthless lending firm. She was fiercely protecting a man who was actively preparing to burn her entire bloodline to the ground. I looked at the security camera mounted above the living room archway. The footage of their threats and their undeniable arrogance was securely stored on my encrypted server. I tapped my tablet, connecting the secure line back to Vaughn. They took the bait, I told my attorney, my voice echoing with icy precision. The in-laws just paid me a visit to demand I vacate the premises. They left a very generous $2,000 donation to facilitate my exit. Vaughn chuckled darkly through the speaker. They are fighting a war with wooden swords. Have you verified the secondary collateral on Nathan's loan application? I have, I confirmed. He tied his parents' Bethesda property to the toxic bridge loan. He is putting everything on black to impress the influencer. Then we simply wait for the ink to dry, Vaughn stated. I ended the call and picked up the check from the counter. The arrogance of the Maryland elite is a remarkable vulnerability. They walk blindly into the fire, cheering for the very flames that will eventually consume them. I walked back into my home office to monitor the incoming data. Nathan was running out of time to secure his dream, and his desperation was about to trigger a catastrophic legal sequence. The walls of the downtown Annapolis hotel suite felt increasingly narrow as Thursday evening approached. Nathan sat at a glass desk near the window, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. The room smelled of half-eaten room service and the lingering, suffocating notes of Harper's designer perfume. Harper lay on the unmade king bed across the room, scrolling through her social media feed with practiced indifference. She had made her expectations exceedingly clear. The $3 million Chesapeake Bay estate was the minimum requirement for her continued affection. Without that waterfront compound, the curated lifestyle she projected to her thousands of followers would crumble, and she would simply pivot to a wealthier benefactor. Nathan could sense her patience thinning with every passing hour. He needed to close the deal, but the predatory lending syndicate he approached had erected a formidable barrier. Shadow lenders specializing in volatile bridge capital do not issue seven-figure loans based on a biotech regional director's salary. They demand hard, tangible equity. Nathan had offered the Maryland suburban home as the primary collateral, boasting about its paid-off status. The underwriting department responded with a standard, unyielding legal requirement. Because my name remained on the deed alongside his, the syndicate mandated a notarized spousal consent form. They needed my explicit, documented permission to risk the property. Nathan knew the truth. He knew I would never jeopardize the home I bought with my own cash to fund a luxury playground for his mistress. Trapped between his fragile ego and Harper's impending departure, Nathan faced a critical juncture. A rational man would have recognized the financial suicide of his position and walked away. But a narcissist, cornered by his own fabricated image, does not retreat. He rewrites reality to suit his needs. Nathan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. He convinced himself that I was currently sitting in the dark, weeping over our ruined marriage, far too paralyzed by heartbreak to monitor property records or county clerk filings. He believed my pedestrian existence as a freelance analyst made me legally blind. In his twisted calculation, forging my consent was not a severe crime. It was merely an administrative shortcut to secure his rightful destiny. He opened a separate browser tab and pulled up a digitized copy of our joint tax return from 2 years prior. He zoomed in on the signature line, studying the swift, efficient loops of my handwriting. He reached into his suit jacket, retrieving an expensive silver fountain pen he had bought on credit. He pulled a blank piece of hotel stationery from the desk drawer and began to practice. The quiet scratch of the metal nib against the thick paper filled the tense air of the suite. He traced the letters over and over, his hand growing steadier with each attempt. He mastered the slight leftward slant of the capital letter and the sharp, abrupt finish of my last name. When he felt confident, he printed the official deed of trust provided by the lending syndicate using the Hotel Business Center printer down the hall. He returned to the suite and spread the thick legal document across the glass desk and took a deep breath. With a steady, arrogant hand, Nathan applied the silver pen to the signature line. He executed a flawless forgery of my name, officially binding me to a highly volatile commercial loan without my knowledge. In that single, deliberate motion, my husband crossed a permanent threshold. He committed felony forgery, identity theft, and federal wire fraud. He blew past the boundaries of a terrible spouse and entered the territory of a federal criminal. Yet the forged marital home was still insufficient to satisfy the ravenous appetite of the shadow lenders. The Maryland property covered a significant portion of the collateral requirements, but the loan-to-value ratio remained precariously unbalanced. Nathan needed a secondary layer of security to guarantee the staggering $3 million injection. He opened another encrypted folder on his desktop, this one containing the comprehensive estate planning documents for his parents, Diane and Charles. 5 years ago, relying on his status as the successful biotech executive of the family, Nathan convinced his aging parents to grant him full power of attorney over their financial portfolio. He promised to shield their assets and generate higher yields for their retirement. Instead, he treated their life savings as an emergency slush fund. He scrolled to the deed for their sprawling, pristine retirement estate, located in the exclusive enclaves of Bethesda. He attached their property title to the collateral schedules of his bridge loan, backing the transaction with their secure retirement. He did not call them to ask for permission. He did not warn them of the profound risk. He simply dragged his own mother and father onto the sinking ship, betting their entire bloodline on his reckless ambition. The application was now complete, loaded with forged signatures, stolen equity, and catastrophic liability. Nathan felt an intoxicating rush of invincible power. He had bypassed the rules that governed ordinary citizens. To celebrate his perceived genius, he decided to twist the knife. He picked up his smartphone, opened our message thread, and typed out a text. Miles away, I sat in my quiet home office analyzing the steady stream of intercepted data flowing across my encrypted monitors. My phone vibrated against the oak desk. I unlocked the screen and read his message. Hope you are packing your cheap bags. I am finalizing the paperwork on a sweeping waterfront compound this week. Try not to be too bitter when you see the photos. I did not flinch. I did not type an angry rebuttal or demand an explanation. I stared at the glowing pixels, analyzing his brazen hubris. He wanted me to feel inferior, to shrink under the shadow of his towering success. Instead, I felt a profound, chilling patience. He was gleefully bragging about a real estate acquisition built on a foundation of federal felonies. He was providing a written timestamp of his criminal intent. I locked my phone and set it aside, turning my full attention back to the primary corporate server of Aegis Protocol. Back in the hotel suite, Nathan finalized the digital loan packet. He converted the forged deed of trust and his parents' property records into a single encrypted file. He navigated to the web portal of the private equity syndicate, a firm known in the industry as Vanguard Credit Partners. He attached the file, checked the box confirming the authenticity of the provided information, and confidently clicked the Submit button. The progress bar flashed across his screen, turning green as the upload completed. Nathan exhaled a long breath, turned around, and smiled at Harper, assuring her that the waterfront compound was officially secured. He thought the application was traveling through the standard commercial banking infrastructure. He assumed the documents would land in the inbox of a faceless, indifferent underwriter sitting in a generic corporate office block. He believed he had successfully outsmarted the system. His ignorance was the fatal flaw in his design. Vanguard Credit Partners was indeed a ruthless lending syndicate, famous for issuing high-interest bridge capital to desperate borrowers. What Nathan failed to uncover during his superficial research was the recent change in their corporate ownership. Less than 8 months ago, Vanguard Credit Partners experienced a severe liquidity crisis. To avoid bankruptcy, they were quietly acquired by a larger, far more powerful holding company operating out of Delaware. That holding company was a heavily obfuscated subsidiary created and controlled entirely by Aegis Protocol. Nathan's fraudulently forged documents did not bypass my perimeter. They flew directly into the center of my web. The digital loan packet encrypted and routed through the Vanguard servers before being instantly mirrored to the parent company oversight division. A sharp, distinct chime echoed from my encrypted terminal. Simultaneously, an alert flashed on the secure dashboard of Elias, my chief compliance officer. Elias opened the file, his expert eyes scanning the signatures and the collateral schedules. He saw my forged handwriting. He saw the unauthorized inclusion of the Bethesda retirement estate. The evidence of federal wire fraud and identity theft was pristine, irrefutable, and legally binding. Nathan thought he was dealing with an anonymous bank. He had no idea he had just handed a signed confession directly to the billionaire wife he was trying to destroy. The secure terminal on my desk emitted a sharp, dual tone. The screen split into 2 encrypted video feeds. On the left sat Elias in his windowless operations center. On the right, Vaughn dialed in from his high-rise office in Bethesda. Elias did not offer pleasantries. He shared a high-resolution image of the bridge loan application Nathan had just submitted to Vanguard Credit Partners. A digital red box highlighted the signature line at the bottom of the deed of trust. I leaned forward, studying the ink strokes. Nathan had studied my handwriting with alarming dedication. The slant of the letters closely mirrored my own, but the pressure points were entirely wrong. The digital forensic software Elias utilized highlighted the hesitation in the curves. The data indicated a slow, deliberate tracing rather than a fluid, natural signature. It was a sophisticated forgery, designed to fool a standard financial underwriter. "We possess irrefutable evidence of felony identity theft," Elias stated, his voice a low monotone. The Internet Protocol address logged on the submission originates from a downtown Annapolis hotel currently registered to your husband. I can package this data and forward it to the Federal Cybercrime Division within 3 minutes. They will have him in an interrogation room by morning. I stared at the forged document. A standard reaction would involve panic and swift law enforcement intervention. But bringing the authorities in now would only trigger an attempted fraud charge. A skilled defense attorney could spin an uncompleted attempt into a desperate marital misunderstanding negotiating a plea deal that required minimal probation. Nathan would walk away with his ego bruised, but his freedom intact. I did not want a bruised ego. I wanted total systemic ruin. Do not contact the authorities, I instructed, leaning back in my chair. Let Vanguard Credit Partners process the application normally. The underwriters will see the pristine equity in the Maryland house and the Bethesda retirement estate. They will approve the $3 million loan. Vaughn frowned, adjusting his silk tie. Anna, if Vanguard funds this loan, Nathan secures the Chesapeake Bay compound. He gains a tangible asset using your stolen equity. The risk exposure is staggering. He only gains a tangible asset if the lender allows him to keep it, I countered. The moment Vanguard approves the underwriting, I want you to initiate a secondary market acquisition. Create a fresh Delaware shell company, approach Vanguard, and purchase Nathan's specific debt portfolio. Pay a premium if necessary. I want to own that specific commercial note the millisecond the funds clear escrow. Vaughn went quiet as his legal mind processed the architecture of the trap. As a man who spent his career dismantling multinational conglomerates, he understood the lethal elegance of the maneuver. By purchasing the debt through a proxy, I became the primary secured creditor. I would hold the leash. Nathan would owe the money directly to an entity I controlled. To ensure the execution remains flawless, we need a customized failsafe. Vaughn suggested reaching for a notepad on his desk. I will draft a specialized addendum to slip into the debt assignment and the final closing disclosures. It is a fraud acceleration and clawback clause. He explained the mechanics of the weapon. Standard foreclosure requires months of tedious litigation, giving the debtor time to hide cash or declare bankruptcy. The specialized clause bypassed the entire judicial delay. It dictated that upon the discovery of any misrepresentation, forged signatures, or fraudulent collateral the debt holder possessed, the irrevocable right to instantly freeze all borrower accounts and seize the purchased assets, without a formal trial. Nathan would sign the closing documents binding himself to a lethal snare hidden deep within page 47 of the dense legal jargon. Implement the clause, I agreed. But we must ensure his guard remains lowered until the ink dries. If Nathan senses my corporate legal team mobilizing, he might panic and withdraw the application. He needs to believe he is outsmarting a vulnerable, resourceless housewife. We need a diversion. The next day, I drove my unremarkable civilian sedan to a rundown strip mall on the outskirts of Baltimore. I bypassed the sleek marble lobbies of premier law firms and walked into an office that smelled of stale coffee and old carpet. The blinds were dusty, and the filing cabinets overflowed with disorganized paperwork. I hired a man named Arthur to represent me in the upcoming divorce mediation. Arthur wore an ill-fitting brown suit, possessed a persistent nervous sweat, and fumbled his client intake forms constantly. He was a discount attorney who relied on volume rather than skill. He spoke in generic legal cliches and seemed overwhelmed by basic property division questions. He was the perfect red herring. I instructed Vaughn to step out of the spotlight. For the duration of the domestic negotiations, the corporate shark would pose as my timid, disorganized personal accountant. Vaughn traded his bespoke navy suits for off-the-rack slacks and a pair of thick-framed glasses. When Nathan looked across the mediation table, he would see a bumbling lawyer and a weak numbers guy. His narcissism would convince him he was the smartest person in the room. He would feel invincible. The diversion worked flawlessly. 2 days later, my secure monitoring interface captured the exact moment the Vanguard loan approval cleared the system. The notification hit Nathan's smartphone while he sat in the hotel suite with Harper. I accessed the hotel room audio feed through a vulnerability Elias exploited in their smart television software. I listened as Nathan let out a loud, triumphant shout. He bragged to Harper that his sheer financial genius had bypassed the rigid banking protocols. He claimed his biotech income projections were so impressive that the bank practically begged him to take the money. I heard the distinct pop of a champagne cork, followed by the delicate clinking of crystal glasses. The sound echoed through my desktop speakers, a vivid audio portrait of unchecked hubris. "To us," Nathan declared, his voice thick with unearned pride. "To the Chesapeake Bay estate, the days of living in a boring suburban trap are over. We are stepping into the elite tier now. Nobody can touch us." Harper giggled, praising his incredible business acumen. She called him her ultimate finance king, stroking his ego with hollow compliments. They toasted to their incredible success, celebrating the impending purchase of the waterfront compound. Nathan believed his forged signature had secured a golden ticket to the upper echelons of Maryland society. He felt like a titan of industry, ready to conquer the local networking scene. He had no idea that the champagne he was drinking tasted like his own impending doom. The execution was officially in motion. He had walked willingly into a burning building, bolted the doors from the inside, and handed me the only key. Now it was time to watch him enjoy the heat. The glowing pixels of my high-resolution monitor painted the dark walls of my home office in a pale and harsh light. Elias had pinged my secure dashboard precisely at dawn, forwarding a web link that required my immediate attention. Emboldened by the fabricated approval of their $3 million commercial loan, my husband and his new companion decided to weaponize the internet. Harper was a 24-year-old digital parasite whose entire societal currency relied upon manufactured envy and inflated engagement metrics. She operated under the delusion that projecting wealth equated to actually possessing it. Now, armed with the illusion of a waterfront compound, she launched a vicious and highly coordinated smear campaign designed to obliterate my credibility. I clicked the provided link, watching the broadcast unfold with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a predictable biological reaction. The footage opened with Harper strutting through the echoing vaulted foyer of the Chesapeake Bay estate. Sunlight poured through the custom architectural glass, illuminating imported marble countertops and soaring ceilings. She spun in a graceful, rehearsed circle, holding her smartphone high above her head to capture the sweeping opulence of the property. Her voice dripped with artificial sweetness as she welcomed her thousands of followers to her ultimate dream sanctuary. She did not merely showcase the architecture. She utilized the platform to deliver calculated, venomous insults directed squarely at me. Harper strolled toward the expansive back patio, gesturing toward the private deep-water dock. She loudly proclaimed to her audience that it felt incredible to finally upgrade her finance king's lifestyle. She referred to me indirectly as a lazy, uninspired anchor who had purposefully stifled a brilliant mind. According to her narrative, I lacked the sophisticated vision required to stand beside a titan of the biotech industry. Nathan stepped into the camera frame at that exact moment, wrapping a proprietary arm around her waist. He kissed her cheek, radiating a borrowed, rented arrogance. Looking directly into the lens, he declared that he had finally shed the pedestrian deadweight holding back his corporate trajectory. He was parading a fraudulently obtained asset to an audience of strangers, basking in the hollow applause of digital sycophants. While the internet eagerly consumed their manufactured triumph, the physical manifestation of his towering hubris arrived at my front door. A heavy knock broke my concentration. I walked to the entryway and accepted a thick manila envelope from a weary process server. Returning to my kitchen island, I sliced the seal open and extracted the contents. Nathan had retained the services of a discount bottom-feeding litigator, a man infamous for plastering his aggressive, sensationalized advertisements across city buses and roadside billboards. The legal demands printed on the cheap paper were so profoundly absurd that a genuine cold laugh escaped my lips. My soon-to-be former husband formally petitioned the Maryland Family Court for permanent spousal alimony. His attorney cited Nathan's high-stress, demanding career, asserting that he required a specific, elevated standard of living that I had stubbornly failed to maintain. He demanded exclusive, uncontested ownership of our fully paid suburban residence, entirely ignoring the fact that my cash had secured the deed years ago. Furthermore, the petition included a strict gag order designed to permanently silence me. He wanted to strip my assets, claim my house, and bind my mouth, attempting to extort me into quiet submission. He genuinely believed the sheer weight of his aggressive legal posturing would crush my spirit. I tossed the ridiculous legal documents aside, refusing to let the pathetic extortion attempt elevate my pulse. I returned to my encrypted terminal, shifting my focus back to Harper's viral broadcast. As a defense contractor, I do not consume media passively. I view every digital artifact as a potential intelligence vulnerability. I initiated my proprietary analytic software, scrubbing through the footage, frame by agonizing frame. My trained eyes searched for anomalies, background reflections, and unintentional disclosures. At the 2-minute and 14-second mark, the camera followed Harper as she performed a dramatic twirl through the gourmet kitchen. The lens swept rapidly past a sprawling granite center island. I slammed my finger onto the spacebar, pausing the playback. I isolated the specific frame, deploying a complex enhancement algorithm to sharpen the blurred, pixelated edges of the background objects. Resting carelessly near a chilled bottle of celebratory champagne was a disorganized stack of manila folders. The digital sharpening tools brought the printed text on the top document into crisp, undeniable focus. My blood ran cold, chilling me down to the marrow. The exposed paperwork consisted of standard Department of Defense procurement ledgers. Highlighted in bright fluorescent ink across the top margin were the exact routing numbers tied to the embezzled federal grant funds. Nathan had been incredibly, catastrophically careless. Intoxicated by his fake victory, he left highly classified financial contraband sitting in plain sight, while his influencer mistress broadcasted its exact location to millions of viewers. The arrogance required to leave evidence of grand larceny on a kitchen counter was staggering. This oversight presented an immediate, highly volatile threat to my operation. If a sharp-eyed federal auditor, an observant rival contractor, or a bored internet sleuth spotted those numeric sequences, the authorities would raid the waterfront property before my snare fully closed. The government tripwire would snap prematurely. A sudden raid might allow his discount lawyer to negotiate a desperate plea agreement, framing the theft as a localized corporate error, rather than an orchestrated malicious fraud. I could not allow the federal agencies to intervene on their own timeline. I needed the execution to happen precisely when his ego reached its absolute zenith. I opened a direct, urgent communication channel to Elias. I transmitted the enhanced image file, pointing out the exposed routing digits. I ordered an immediate digital quarantine of Harper's social media presence. Elias did not hesitate. Operating from his windowless command center, he deployed a sophisticated proprietary shadow banning protocol. He bypassed the standard user interfaces, injecting manipulative code directly into the back-end algorithms of the major hosting platforms. We did not delete the broadcast. Erasing the footage would trigger immediate suspicion and potentially cause Nathan to panic and destroy the physical evidence. Instead, Elias subtly suffocated the content's digital reach. The platform algorithms were instructed to throttle the video's visibility artificially, stalling the engagement metrics and preventing it from appearing on any trending feeds. The broadcast remained perfectly live on her profile to satisfy their ravenous egos, but it became virtually invisible to anyone operating outside their immediate, sycophantic echo chamber. The threat of premature discovery was expertly neutralized in under 12 minutes. Nathan monitored my lack of public retaliation with immense satisfaction. He watched the days pass without a single defensive social media post, angry text message, or panicked phone call from my side. His narcissism interpreted my tactical discipline as pure, unadulterated terror. He genuinely believed I was cowering in my sweatpants, emotionally devastated by his shiny new life and paralyzed by the aggressive legal threats delivered by his billboard attorney. He sent me a brief mocking text message later that evening, feigning pity for my refusal to publicly defend myself. He advised me to sign the divorce papers quickly to save myself further embarrassment. He remained entirely, tragically oblivious to the reality of his situation. His digital victory lap was not a triumph. It was a meticulously archived, time-stamped confession of his unrepentant criminal intent. While he toasted his brilliance overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, I sat in my glowing office, downloading every single high-definition frame into an impenetrable encrypted vault. I cataloged his smug smile, his stolen documents, and his brazen declarations of success. He was voluntarily building the ultimate character evidence portfolio for his impending federal indictment. The noose was tightening with exquisite perfection, and the arrogant fool continued to eagerly pull the rope, ensuring his own spectacular demise as we rapidly approached our scheduled mediation session. The morning sun broke over the sleek glass facade of the financial district skyscraper, casting long, cold shadows across the concrete plaza below. I stepped out of the rideshare vehicle, pulling the oversized collar of my faded gray sweater tightly around my neck. The soft knit was visibly worn at the wrists and hung loosely over my shoulders, intentionally chosen from the deepest corner of my closet to project the precise image of a woman whose spirit had been entirely extinguished. To any casual observer navigating the morning rush, I appeared to be a defeated housewife heading toward her final financial execution. Nathan had spent years cultivating the myth among our friends and business associates that I was fragile, overly emotional, and completely incapable of understanding basic financial matters. He had carefully built that narrative to isolate me from our wealth, but on this chilly morning, his own prejudice was about to become my greatest weapon. As I stepped into the quiet elevator and selected the 34th floor, where the premier corporate mediation suites were located, I checked my reflection in the polished mirrored panel. My hair was gathered in a loose, hasty knot, and my skin was pale and unadorned by makeup. I took a deep, steadying breath, suppressing the sharpness in my mind, and stepped into the role I had been preparing to play for months. The grand conference room offered an expansive, uninterrupted view of the harbor skyline, but the atmosphere inside was suffocatingly cold. Nathan was already seated at the far end of the long mahogany table, flanked by two top-tier corporate attorneys who specialized in aggressive asset protection and high-net-worth divorces. Nathan wore a bespoke navy suit paired with custom gold cufflinks that caught the harsh overhead lighting, exuding the calm, arrogant authority of a man who believed he ruled every room he entered. For over a decade, Nathan had operated with absolute impunity, utilizing his proprietary biotech startup as his personal piggy bank, while secretly routing millions in stolen federal research grants into a private consulting firm. He genuinely believed that his intellect placed him far above the law and light years ahead of anyone sitting across from him. Resting his manicured hands on the dark wood, he looked up at me with an expression of thinly veiled contempt as I entered. Sitting down beside me was Mr. Henderson, the attorney I had painstakingly selected for this pivotal morning. Henderson was a soft-spoken, elderly sole practitioner who wore a slightly rumpled tweed jacket and carried a battered leather briefcase bursting with unsorted papers. To Nathan's sharp corporate team, Henderson looked like an incompetent country lawyer who was completely out of his depth in a high-stakes corporate negotiation. That was precisely the illusion I required to execute my plan flawlessly. The mediation commenced without pleasantries, as Nathan's lead attorney slid a heavy stack of legal documents across the polished table. The terms were uncompromising and viciously unfair. Nathan was demanding absolute ownership of our $4 million suburban residence, full rights to all liquid assets in our joint investment portfolios, and complete retention of his entire corporate empire. He intended to walk away with everything we had built, leaving me with nothing more than a symbolic stipend meant to keep me barely above water. Nathan leaned back in his leather armchair, interlacing his fingers behind his head, as he watched my eyes scan the demand pages. I allowed my hands to begin trembling visibly against the white paper. Beside me, Mr. Henderson began fumbling with his reading glasses, dropping his pen onto the carpet and stuttering as he attempted to articulate a weak legal objection. Nathan's attorneys easily cut him off with razor-thin smiles, dismissing his arguments before he could even finish a sentence. Nathan let out a short, amused breath, highly entertained by the total breakdown of my defense. That was my cue to begin the performance of a lifetime. I pressed my palms against my temples and let out a soft, shuddering gasp. My breathing accelerated into ragged, uneven, shallow breaths, simulating a full-blown, severe panic attack. Tears welled up in my eyes and began spilling down my pale cheeks, dripping onto the faded wool of my oversized gray sweater. I wrapped my arms around my torso, shivering as if the temperature in the executive suite had dropped below freezing point. When Mr. Henderson reached over to offer a soothing word, I dramatically pushed his hand away and spoke directly to Nathan. My voice cracked, high-pitched and trembling with desperate terror. I sobbed out loud, telling Nathan that I could not endure another single day of this crushing conflict. I pleaded with him to take everything he was asking for and more. I begged him to take the house, to take every penny in the investment accounts, and to take total responsibility for all corporate debts, tax liabilities, and outstanding business loans tied to his biotech venture and his personal consulting firm. I blurted out that I was terrified of his complex corporate structures, terrified of federal tax audits, and completely incapable of understanding his intricate accounting arrangements. I sobbed that I just wanted to be free of his overwhelming business world, and that I wanted nothing to do with his companies, his loans, or his corporate liabilities ever again. Mr. Henderson feigned absolute horror at my outburst, frantically trying to interrupt me and ordering me to stop talking, which only made my desperate surrender appear entirely genuine. Nathan was practically glowing with toxic satisfaction. In his mind, my pathetic emotional collapse was the ultimate validation of his superiority. He had always viewed me as a simple creature who was paralyzed by financial complexity, and my terrified weeping confirmed every single bias he held against me. He believed I was fleeing from his complex corporate empire out of sheer ignorance and weakness. Nathan leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, a cold, mocking grin spreading across his face. He looked at me with pure disdain, immensely enjoying the sight of my public breakdown in front of 5 seasoned professionals. He reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out his solid gold Mont Blanc fountain pen, a heavy, extravagant writing utensil he used to finalize his high-value corporate deals. Instead of extending it across the table with common courtesy, Nathan flicked his wrist with casual disrespect, sending the heavy gold pen tumbling across the polished mahogany surface. It clattered loudly against the wood, skittering past documents until it struck my trembling hand. He sneered, telling me to sign the papers immediately and stop embarrassing myself like a pathetic child. I wiped my eyes with the back of my frayed sleeve, picking up the heavy gold pen with shaking fingers. Through my tear-filled gaze, I focused on the specific document lying at the bottom of the stack, which was the very clause my legal strategist had quietly fed into the mediation framework weeks ago, under the guise of standard liability separation. Blinded by his overwhelming ego and desperate to keep full control of his private consulting firm, which was the primary legal vessel he was using to launder millions in embezzled federal grant money. Nathan had insisted on taking complete, individual ownership of that specific corporate entity. However, to ensure that I could never touch his illicit profits, the contract contained an absolute, legally binding, and irrevocable assumption of liability clause. By signing the agreement, Nathan was explicitly accepting total, retroactive personal responsibility for every single financial, tax, and federal liability ever attached to his name and his business ventures. Because he believed those accounts contained untouched millions that I was too foolish to claim, he did not realize that he was legally binding himself to every illegal scheme he had ever orchestrated. I pressed the tip of his gold pen to the parchment and signed my name in frantic, uneven script, looking up at him with wide, frightened eyes as I pushed the signed documents back toward his side of the table. Nathan grabbed the papers eagerly, leaning over to sign his own bold signature across every line with supreme confidence. He explicitly accepted every retroactive federal liability, every unpaid corporate debt, and a toxic $3 million high-interest loan that had been secretly called in by private lenders earlier that morning. When the final signature was dried, Nathan stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and offered a dismissive shake of his hand to his legal team. He picked up his leather briefcase, cast one last triumphant look at my trembling figure in the oversized sweater, and walked out of the glass doors like an undisputed king leaving a conquered territory. He genuinely believed he had stripped me of my dignity, my home, and my financial future, utterly unaware that he had just legally handcuffed his own wrist to millions of dollars in fraudulent debts and imminent federal prosecution. The moment the heavy glass door clicked shut behind Nathan and his attorneys, the atmosphere in the conference room shifted instantly. I reached into my bag, pulled out a tissue, and calmly wiped the remaining tear tracks from my cheeks. My breathing steadied into a slow, deliberate rhythm, and I sat up straight, rolling back my shoulders as the trembling in my hands vanished completely. Beside me, Mr. Henderson casually removed his reading glasses, tucked away his yellow notepad, and placed the signed liability contracts into a secure steel briefcase with calm, practiced efficiency. His earlier clumsy demeanor dissolved into a sharp, quiet smile. We rode down the private elevator in complete, satisfying silence. As we stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight of the plaza, my phone vibrated intensely inside my coat pocket. I pulled out the device, expecting a routine confirmation from my primary legal team, but the screen displayed an urgent, high-priority notification from the lead forensic accountant assisting the federal grand jury task force. The message revealed that within 5 minutes of leaving the mediation room, Nathan had attempted an emergency international wire transfer of $2 million from his consulting firm's account to an offshore bank in the Caribbean. A reckless panic movement that immediately triggered an automated red flag freeze across all his domestic financial accounts. His ego had driven him directly into the trap, confirming his active involvement in grand-scale money laundering. However, before I could even process the news of his impending arrest, my phone buzzed again with an incoming text from an unknown encrypted number. Attached was a single high-definition photo taken just 30 seconds prior. It showed the front door of my private apartment building standing wide open, with the deadbolt lock shattered onto the floorboards, and a dark, unfamiliar shadow moving through my living room. I stared at the shattered deadbolt illuminated on my phone screen. The initial surge of adrenaline did not cloud my judgment. It sharpened my focus into a razor edge. I dialed Elias, keeping my eyes fixed on the dark, unfamiliar shadow moving through the digital feed of my private living room. He answered before the first ring concluded. "The intruder is secured," Elias reported, his tone a low, soothing hum of pure efficiency. My personal security detail had intercepted a local, low-level operative attempting to bypass my secondary alarms. The man confessed under minimal pressure that Nathan offered him $5,000 in cash to sweep my private residence. Nathan wanted physical hard drives, financial ledgers, or hidden cash to leverage against me in the divorce. He was flailing. His failed offshore wire transfer earlier that afternoon had pushed him into a desperate corner, making him sloppy enough to hire a thief. I instructed Elias to hand the trespasser over to local law enforcement, using an untraceable tip. Let Nathan sit in his hotel room, wondering why his hired hand vanished into the penal system without a trace. The physical breach was the final signal I required. The domestic dispute was officially terminated. The federal execution was now mandatory. I navigated to a secure terminal within Vaughn's architectural fortress of an office. The digital dossier sat on my encrypted drive, a beautiful, lethal collection of numerical data, ready to be unleashed. I spent the next hour reviewing the files, ensuring every piece of evidence was pristine. The records showed Nathan siphoning Department of Defense grant money from his biotech firm over a period of 18 months. He had targeted specific, highly sensitive funds earmarked for advanced combat trauma research, filtering the money through a labyrinth of phantom consulting limited liability companies. Because his employer functioned as a Tier 2 subcontractor for my enterprise Aegis protocol, the money he siphoned originated directly from federal defense budgets. In the realm of white-collar crime, stealing civilian funds earns a stern audit and a hefty fine. Siphoning defense contracting dollars triggers swift, unyielding government intervention that ends with decades behind bars. I executed a customized, highly complex routing protocol. The compiled evidence bounced across 7 encrypted servers located in neutral European jurisdictions, scrubbing any trace of its origin before dropping squarely into the digital intake boxes of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Defense Contract Audit Agency. I included the mediation document Nathan signed just hours ago, focusing on the specific page where he legally bound himself to all retroactive liabilities. The federal agents would not need to spend months piercing the corporate veil to find the culprit. Nathan had proudly signed his own confession and handed it to them on premium cardstock. As the upload progress bar reached 100%, my civilian cell phone vibrated on the polished granite desk. A group text message illuminated the screen. It was from Diane, my former mother-in-law, with Gemma copied on the thread. The attached photograph showed the 2 women lounging on the pristine teak deck of a gleaming 50-foot catamaran moored in the Annapolis harbor. They held crystal flutes of champagne, toasting the camera with bright, artificial smiles. The accompanying text dripped with unearned aristocratic entitlement. "We are celebrating Nathan's triumph," Diane wrote, her words a testament to her profound ignorance. "The wealth is trickling down to the family where it belongs. We are putting down a deposit on this beauty today. Enjoy your cheap rental, Anna." I stared at the message, picturing them sitting at the polished teak desk of the yacht broker, breathing in the scent of salt water and expensive leather. They were likely waiting for Nathan to wire the preliminary deposit from accounts that were currently under active federal surveillance. I did not type a response. I did not warn them that the money they were expecting was a toxic illusion. I simply selected their contact profiles and pressed block. They would be standing at the marina, refreshing their screens, demanding funds from a man who was hurtling toward a prison cell, wondering why their calls were met with dead air. Within hours of the anonymous tip, the quiet, terrifying machinery of federal justice began to turn. Through Elias's monitoring of the regional banking networks, we watched the subtle shifts in Nathan's digital footprint. The FBI did not kick down his hotel door in the middle of the night. They operated with chilling patience, placing silent holds on his wire transfers, freezing his offshore routing capabilities, and monitoring his outgoing communications. They were building an inescapable perimeter, weaving a net so tight he would not realize he was caught until he could no longer breathe. Nathan remained entirely oblivious to the crosshairs aligning directly over his chest. Instead of checking his bank ledgers or wondering why his wire transfers were stalling, he was focused entirely on his sartorial presentation. My surveillance feed tracked a charge at an exclusive bespoke tailor in Bethesda. Nathan was renting a $5,000 tuxedo, charging the exorbitant fee to a newly opened credit line he had secured using his fabricated biotech income. He was preparing for the Maryland Maritime Gala, the most prestigious charity event of the season. The gala was a legendary gathering of the wealthiest defense contractors, prominent politicians, and maritime innovators in the state. Nathan believed this event would serve as his coronation into the elite echelons of high society. He planned to walk into the grand ballroom with Harper on his arm, shaking hands with industry titans, cementing his status as a self-made millionaire who had outgrown his pedestrian wife. He spent hours getting tailored, ensuring the silk lapels laid perfectly across his chest. He envisioned a night of flowing champagne, endless networking, and universal adoration. He believed the hard part was over, convinced that his legal maneuvering during the mediation had secured his empire. He imagined the envious stares of his peers when he subtly mentioned his sprawling Chesapeake Bay estate. The narcissism pulsing through his veins acted as a blindfold, shielding him from the reality of his crumbling financial architecture. He had no idea the event he was preparing for was heavily sponsored by Aegis Protocol. He did not know that the billionaire chief executive officer hosting the evening was the woman he had discarded for failing to match his trajectory. He was renting a designer tuxedo to walk the red carpet of his own funeral, eager to smile for the cameras, right before the ground gave way beneath him. The grand ballroom of the Annapolis Naval Heritage Center hummed with the quiet, potent energy of true power. Towering crystal chandeliers cast a golden fractured light across the polished marble floor. Waiters in pristine white jackets moved seamlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays adorned with flutes of vintage champagne and delicate caviar hors d'oeuvres. The room smelled of fresh sea salt, roasted pine nuts, and the subtle, sharp notes of expensive cologne. This was the Maryland Maritime Gala. It was an annual gathering where defense contractors, seasoned politicians, and aerospace innovators gathered to trade secrets and shape the federal budget. From the elevated darkness of a private viewing balcony, I watched the sea of attendees mingle below. My fingers traced the smooth edge of my crystal water glass. I was not there to network. I was there to oversee an execution. The heavy brass doors at the primary entrance swung open, drawing a few scattered glances from the crowd. Nathan strode into the venue wearing his rented $5,000 tuxedo. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the relaxed, quiet authority of a billionaire. He looked rigid and severely overcompensated. Harper clung tightly to his right arm, draped in a floor-length sequined gown that sparkled far too intensely under the refined lighting. She wore a heavy diamond necklace, a rented piece that sat awkwardly against her collarbone. They looked like tourists who had accidentally stumbled onto a highly restricted military base, yet they carried themselves with unmatched, blinding hubris. I watched Nathan scan the room, his eyes darting hungrily toward the clusters of powerful men standing near the ice sculptures. For years he had complained about these very men, resenting their success and blaming his own mid-level status on a rigged corporate system. Tonight, propelled by a forged loan and millions in stolen federal cash, he believed he had finally purchased a seat at their table. He leaned down, whispering something into Harper's ear. She giggled, tossing her hair over her shoulder, and together they plunged into the crowd. He did not ease his way into the conversations. He forced his presence onto a group of elite defense logistics executives standing near the center of the ballroom. I knew these men intimately. 2 of them managed supply chain operations for naval intelligence, and the third was a senior risk analyst for my own firm, Aegis Protocol. They were men who dealt in extreme operational secrecy and calculated precision. Nathan interrupted their quiet discussion, extending his hand with a bright, predatory smile. He introduced himself loudly, ensuring everyone in a 10-foot radius could hear his fabricated title. He began speaking with total reckless abandon. I watched the senior risk analyst raise a single eyebrow, his polite facade faltering as Nathan launched into a theatrical monologue about his recent financial triumphs. "The aerospace sector is far too cautious," Nathan proclaimed, swirling his champagne glass. "The real capital is found in structural loopholes. You just have to know how to navigate the bureaucratic blind spots. I recently finalized the paperwork on a $3 million waterfront compound on the Chesapeake Bay. It is a stunning property. Securing the capital was incredibly straightforward once I leveraged a brilliant oversight in the federal grant allocation system. It is all about maximizing your operational overhead." The three executives exchanged swift, silent glances. In the realm of federal contracting, bragging about exploiting government grants is synonymous with confessing to a felony. To do so at a charity event, heavily sponsored by the region's largest defense firm, was an act of profound, staggering stupidity. The Naval Intelligence Manager offered a tight, forced smile, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Is that right?" the manager asked, his tone laced with chilling skepticism. "Operating outside standard compliance is a rather bold strategy, Nathan. The federal oversight committees are typically very thorough." Nathan laughed a loud, grating sound that echoed awkwardly over the string quartet playing in the corner. "You just need a creative consulting structure. The federal auditors only see the surface data. If you layer the subcontracts properly, the money flows exactly where you want it. It is just basic corporate maneuvering." He was practically painting a target on his own forehead. He stood in a room full of federal contractors, sipping expensive champagne and proudly outlining the exact mechanics of his wire fraud. He felt invincible, eager to prove that he was the smartest man in the room. He had no concept of the lethal irony unfolding around him. He was confessing to stealing from Aegis Protocol while standing under a banner that displayed the company logo. As Nathan continued his arrogant speech, a sharp, repetitive vibration broke his concentration. His phone buzzed urgently in the breast pocket of his tuxedo. He ignored it at first, eager to finish his thought on waterfront property taxes, but the buzzing persisted with frantic intensity. Annoyed, he pulled the device out and glanced at the illuminated screen. From my vantage point, I could not read the text, but I knew exactly what it said. Elias had confirmed the transmission just moments prior. It was an emergency message from Nathan's personal accountant. The text warned of sudden, inexplicable banking freezes spreading across his entire network. The accountant was begging him to call immediately, stating that the corporate ledgers had been locked down by an unknown federal authority. Nathan stared at the screen. For a fleeting second, a shadow of confusion crossed his features. The pristine illusion he had constructed wavered, but the narcissism pulsing through his veins quickly suppressed the warning. He looked at the wealthy executives surrounding him, then looked at Harper, who was smiling brightly at a passing waiter. He could not process the concept of failure on the night of his grand coronation. He let out a quiet scoff, muttering a dismissive comment about banking software glitches, and swiped the notification away. He shoved the phone back into his pocket, prioritizing his fragile ego over the desperate warning of his own financial collapse. He chose to keep dancing on the deck of a sinking ship. The ambient hum of the ballroom slowly began to fade as the string quartet ceased playing. The warm, golden lighting dimmed, drawing the audience's attention toward the grand stage at the far end of the venue. A hush fell over the crowd. The host of the evening, a highly respected retired naval admiral, stepped up to the polished mahogany podium and adjusted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the admiral announced, his deep voice carrying a tone of immense reverence. Tonight, we celebrate the innovation and security that protects our shores and our nation. We are deeply honored to be joined by our primary sponsor. For the past decade, this individual has built an impenetrable digital fortress, securing our most sensitive defense networks, while remaining entirely out of the public eye. Tonight marks a rare and profound occasion. Nathan stood on his toes, craning his neck to see the stage. His eyes widened with frantic hunger. He grabbed Harper by the hand and began shoving his way through the dense crowd of dignitaries. He stepped on polished shoes and brushed past furious state senators desperate to secure a position in the very front row. He wanted to be the first person the billionaire saw. He intended to shake the hand of the Aegis Protocol founder, convinced that a single conversation would elevate his status permanently. Please welcome the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Protocol, the admiral concluded, stepping away from the podium. The heavy velvet curtains at the back of the stage began to part. A single blinding spotlight pierced the darkness, illuminating the center of the platform. Nathan stood mere feet from the stage edge, his chest heaving from his push through the crowd. He straightened his rented bow tie and plastered a wide, eager smile across his face, ready to greet a titan of industry. I stepped out from the shadows and walked into the harsh glare of the spotlight. I wore a custom-tailored floor-length emerald gown. The rich, dark silk moved like liquid glass as I walked, projecting a quiet, lethal authority. My hair was styled in a sleek, immaculate sweep, and my posture radiated the unshakable confidence of a woman who owned the very ground beneath her feet. I reached the mahogany podium and rested my hands lightly on the polished wood. I did not look at the retired admiral, and I did not look at the hundreds of defense contractors filling the room. I directed my gaze straight down to the front row. Nathan stood frozen. The eager, pathetic smile dissolved from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. His jaw dropped open, his breath hitching audibly in his throat. The color drained from his skin, turning his complexion a sickly, translucent gray. He blinked rapidly, his mind actively short-circuiting as it tried to reconcile the image of his pedestrian sweatpants-wearing wife with the billionaire defense titan standing at the podium. He looked at the Aegis Protocol logo projected onto the screen behind me and then back at my face. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had just spent the last hour bragging about stealing federal funds to the employees of the very woman he had abandoned. I leaned toward the microphone, holding his horrified stare, and prepared to deliver his final execution order. I stood at the polished glass podium, looking down at the man who had discarded me for being too ordinary. The silence in the grand ballroom was profound. Hundreds of distinguished guests waited for my opening remarks, but my attention remained locked squarely on Nathan. His face was a canvas of pure terror. The arrogant smirk he wore all evening had evaporated into the sterile air. I gripped the edges of the podium and leaned toward the microphone. "Good evening," I began, my voice echoing with crisp authority across the vast space. "For 10 years, I have built this enterprise in the shadows, preferring to let our actions speak louder than our presence." Nathan swallowed hard, his throat moving erratically. I could see a bead of sweat tracing a slow path down his temple. "We operate in an industry where integrity is not just a corporate buzzword. It is the very foundation of national security." I let my gaze sweep briefly over the elite crowd of defense contractors and politicians before returning to my husband. "When we allocate funding for critical biomedical defense research, we demand transparency. We trust our subcontractors to uphold the highest ethical standards. Unfortunately, the allure of unchecked capital occasionally attracts parasites." I watched Nathan take a tiny, unstable step backward. His rented tuxedo suddenly looked ill-fitting, sagging against his deflating posture. "There are individuals who believe they can outsmart the system," I continued, my tone dropping to a chilling register. They hide behind fabricated titles, wearing rented clothes to charity events, convincing themselves that their proximity to power makes them invincible. The crowd murmured, sensing the shift from a standard welcome address to a targeted verbal execution. The three senior logistics executives standing near Nathan slowly took a deliberate step away from him, their professional instincts warning them to distance themselves from a sinking ship. These individuals drain essential resources to fund their unearned vanity, I stated, speaking directly to his horrified eyes. They forge signatures to secure waterfront real estate. They exploit the very hands that feed them, blind to the fact that every digital keystroke is monitored and recorded. Nathan looked as though the oxygen had been drained from the room. He clutched his chest, gasping for shallow breaths. The realization that every single person in the room now knew he was a fraud was crushing his spirit in real time. "Tonight we are not just celebrating maritime innovation," I announced, gripping the podium tighter. "We are executing a cleansing of our own house. We are demonstrating the fatal consequences of fraud, and Aegis Protocol does not tolerate thieves." That final word was the authorized signal. The heavy brass doors at the rear of the ballroom swung open with a resounding crash. A synchronized unit of federal investigators and my private security detail moved into the venue with surgical precision. They wore tactical vests over dark clothing, their badges gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. The elite attendees parted instinctively, creating a wide, clear path straight to the front row. The string quartet stopped playing abruptly. The only sound remaining in the vast hall was the heavy, rhythmic thud of tactical boots marching across the polished marble floor. Nathan stood paralyzed, his shoes rooted to the ground. The lead agent stopped directly in front of him. The investigator did not lower his voice to spare my husband any humiliation. "Nathan, you are under arrest," the agent declared, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the room. "You are charged with federal wire fraud, the embezzlement of government defense grants, and felony forgery." Beside him, Harper let out a sharp, genuine gasp. The young lifestyle influencer rapidly processed the catastrophic scene unfolding around her. She looked at the armed federal agents, then looked at the man she had proudly flaunted on social media as her ultimate finance king. The truth hit her with brutal force. Her wealthy benefactor was not a biotech titan. He was a broke criminal about to lose his freedom. Survival instinct overrode whatever shallow affection she harbored. Harper physically dropped his hand as if his skin had caught fire. Her manicured fingers flew to the back of her neck. She frantically unclasped the heavy diamond necklace she had rented for the occasion, terrified that possessing it would implicate her in his financial crimes. She shoved the glittering jewelry roughly into the front pocket of Nathan's tuxedo jacket. Without a backward glance, she turned on her heel, lifted the hem of her sequined gown, and sprinted toward the service exit. She abandoned him to face the federal authorities entirely alone. Nathan did not try to stop her. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving as the agents grabbed his arms and forced them behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of the steel cuffs ratcheting shut echoed fiercely in the quiet ballroom. He fell to his knees, his tailored pants hitting the floor, weeping openly in front of the most powerful politicians and contractors in Maryland. I stepped away from the glass podium and descended the short staircase to the main floor. The crowd watched in hushed awe as I glided toward the exit. The agents hoisted Nathan back to his feet and began dragging him down the central aisle. As our paths crossed, Nathan twisted his neck, his tear-filled eyes meeting mine in a silent, desperate plea for mercy. I did not stop walking. I did not offer a single word of recognition or pity. I glided past him, leaving nothing but the rustle of emerald silk in my wake. Hours later, the flashing red and blue lights of the federal cruisers had faded from the Annapolis night. The adrenaline of the ballroom execution had settled into a profound, quiet peace. I was sitting in the sanctuary of my home office, watching the coastal rain gently tap against the window pane. I had traded the custom emerald gown for my favorite comfortable sweatpants, returning to the exact spot where the betrayal had begun 14 days prior. The digital clock glowed brightly in the darkness. It was exactly 2 in the morning. My civilian cell phone vibrated on the oak desk, shattering the silence. The caller identification displayed Derek Nathan's closest confidant. He was a man who had undoubtedly laughed at Nathan's cruel jokes about my unremarkable appearance. I picked up the device and pressed it to my ear. "Anna, please answer," Derek stammered, his voice breathless and high-pitched with panic. "Something happened tonight, and it is about you. The feds swarmed the gala. Nathan is in handcuffs. They took him away. You have to call a lawyer. I think someone set him up." I took a slow sip of my tea, savoring the rich, dark flavor. I looked at the shredded remnants of the cashier's check resting in the clear plastic bin across the room. "I know, Derek," I replied, my voice smooth and crystalline. I was wearing an emerald dress. I pressed the end button, cutting off his frantic confusion. I placed the phone face down on the desk, letting the undeniable reality of my victory wash over me. Nathan was currently sitting in a cold concrete holding cell, stripped of his rented tuxedo and his fabricated ego. He was denied bail, facing a formidable federal indictment, with zero financial resources to mount a defense. The man who thought he could do better was about to discover the harsh, unforgiving nature of a federal penitentiary. However, the execution was only half finished. Across town, in the affluent suburbs of Bethesda, his parents and sister were currently sleeping soundly in their comfortable beds. Diane, Charles, and Gemma were likely dreaming of the yacht they planned to purchase, eagerly awaiting the wealth they believed was trickling down to them. They rested in their unearned arrogance, insulated by a false sense of superiority. They had no idea that when the sun rose, their bank accounts would be frozen, their properties would be seized, and the very foundation of their entitled existence would crumble into dust. The reckoning for the rest of the bloodline was merely hours away. The morning light filtering into the federal holding facility was a harsh, unforgiving gray. Nathan awoke on a thin, rigid mattress, the rented designer tuxedo replaced by a stiff, coarse jumpsuit. The intoxicating illusion of his boundless ambition had dissolved into the stark reality of concrete walls and steel bars. At his preliminary arraignment, the magistrate reviewed the staggering volume of stolen defense grant funds and instantly recognized the severe flight risk. Bail was denied without a second thought. My husband, the man who had demanded a high society partner to match his trajectory, was now a permanent resident of the federal penal system, entirely stripped of his fabricated dignity. While Nathan sat shivering in a sterile cell 30 miles away in the affluent enclave of Bethesda, his family was waking up to a pristine, sunlit morning. Diane and Charles sat in the breakfast nook of their sprawling retirement estate, sipping imported tea from fine porcelain cups. They were basking in the residual glow of their son's perceived victory, blissfully anticipating the trickle-down wealth he had promised. They believed they were the matriarch and patriarch of a newly minted corporate dynasty. They had no inkling that the foundation beneath their custom hardwood floors had already turned to dust. Across town in Annapolis, my sister-in-law Gemma was preparing to celebrate the family's manufactured triumph. Gemma thrived on the performance of wealth, utilizing her last name as a shield against any personal inadequacy. Armed with a platinum corporate credit card tied directly to Nathan's business accounts, she strutted into the most exclusive designer boutique in the historic district. The store was a sanctuary of soft velvet seating and hushed, reverent tones, catering strictly to the maritime elite. Gemma moved through the aisles with profound entitlement, bypassing the sales racks and pointing a manicured finger at the newest arrivals. She gathered an armful of pure cashmere sweaters, a bespoke leather handbag, and a pair of imported silk scarves. She marched to the polished glass checkout counter, treating the sales associates with her trademark dismissive arrogance. The boutique manager tallied the exorbitant total, offering a polite, practiced smile. Gemma did not even glance at the final number. She simply pulled the heavy platinum card from her purse and dropped it onto the glass surface with a sharp, resonant clack, fully expecting the seamless transaction that usually accompanied her family name. The manager inserted the card into the sleek payment terminal. Instead of the gentle chime of approval, the machine emitted a harsh, piercing rejection tone. A bright red error message illuminated the digital screen. The manager frowned slightly, retrieving the card and wiping the chip before inserting it a second time. The obnoxious rejection tone echoed again, much louder, in the quiet, sophisticated atmosphere of the boutique. The polite smile vanished from the manager's face, replaced by a tight expression of professional discomfort. "I am sorry, madam," the manager said, his voice carrying just enough to turn the heads of the other wealthy patrons browsing nearby. "Your financial institution has declined the transaction. Do you have an alternative method of payment available today?" A hot, ugly flush crept up Gemma's neck, staining her pale cheeks. The other shoppers, women Gemma recognized from her various country club luncheons, paused their conversations to watch the unfolding spectacle. In their hyper-competitive social circle, a declined card was the ultimate unforgivable sin. It was a glaring neon sign of financial ruin. Gemma snatched the platinum card from the counter, her hands trembling with sudden, uncharacteristic panic. She opened her purse and retrieved her personal bank debit card, shoving it toward the manager. "Run this one," Gemma ordered, her voice shrill and offensive. "The corporate system must be undergoing routine maintenance. Run my personal account." The manager processed the second card. The machine beeped a third time, the rejection tone cutting through the air like a siren. "I am afraid this account is also currently locked," the manager stated, taking a deliberate step backward. "The terminal indicates a comprehensive institutional freeze." The murmurs of the surrounding elite shoppers grew louder, transforming into quiet, venomous whispers. Gemma felt the crushing weight of their judgment. The aristocratic armor she wore so proudly shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces right there on the boutique floor. She grabbed her purse, abandoning the cashmere and the leather handbag on the glass counter, and practically sprinted out the front doors. She burst onto the cobblestone street, gasping for air, her fingers flying across her smartphone screen as she dialed her mother's number. Back at the Bethesda estate, Diane answered the phone, irritated by the frantic ringing interrupting her quiet morning. Gemma was nearly hysterical on the other end of the line, sobbing about the humiliating public scene and the inexplicable banking errors. Diane sighed, assuming her daughter had simply overdrawn her personal limit again. She set her teacup down, opened her laptop, and logged into the primary wealth management portal to transfer some funds and resolve the supposed glitch. The screen loaded slowly. When the dashboard finally materialized, Diane did not see their comfortable 7-figure retirement balance. She saw a glaring sequence of zeros. A stark, unyielding banner stretched across the top of the interface, displaying a terrifying message. "All assets attached to this portfolio have been placed under a mandatory, irrevocable freeze due to the execution of a default judgment." "Charles," Diane whispered, her voice a hollow, terrified rasp. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking suddenly fragile and old. Charles set aside his morning newspaper and rushed to her side, staring at the incomprehensible screen. Before either of them could formulate a rational thought, a sharp, heavy knock sounded at their front door. Charles opened the door to find a man in a plain gray suit standing on their porch. The man did not smile. He handed Charles a thick, securely bound stack of legal documents, stated that they had been officially served, and walked back to his vehicle without another word. Charles carried the heavy packet into the kitchen, his hands shaking as he broke the seal. The documents bore the intimidating letterhead of a premier corporate holding company. Charles flipped to the first page, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. It was an official notice of immediate foreclosure and asset seizure. The legal brief outlined the exact mechanics of their ruin in merciless detail. Nathan had utilized his power of attorney to cross-collateralize their pristine retirement home, leveraging their entire life savings to secure a toxic $3 million commercial bridge loan. Diane covered her mouth, a stifled sob tearing from her throat. The golden son she had praised for his visionary intellect had secretly mortgaged her future to buy a waterfront playground for his mistress. But the true horror lay in the subsequent paragraphs. Because Nathan had forged documents and submitted fraudulent applications, the specialized fraud acceleration clause had been triggered. The debt holder possessed the irrevocable right to instantly seize all collateral without the standard judicial delays. The Bethesda estate, the sanctuary they intended to inhabit for the rest of their lives, no longer belonged to them. They were effectively homeless, bankrupt, and drowning in a debt they never knew existed. Gemma arrived at the house minutes later, bursting through the front door with her makeup smeared from crying. She found her parents sitting at the kitchen table, looking like ghosts. Charles pushed the foreclosure notice toward his daughter, unable to articulate the sheer magnitude of their sudden destruction. "We have to call the holding company," Gemma shrieked, grasping at the final desperate straws of her fading entitlement. "We acted without our consent. We are victims here. They cannot just take our home and our money." Diane snatched the legal packet from the table, her hands trembling violently as she searched for a contact number. She located the signature page at the very back of the sprawling document. She intended to call the corporate office, demand to speak to the executive in charge, and utilize her formidable social standing to bully them into an extension. She believed she could negotiate her way out of the abyss, relying on the same aristocratic arrogance that had shielded her for decades. She smoothed out the final piece of thick parchment, her eyes dropping to the authorization line where the chief executive officer had signed the execution order. The intricate, fluid loops of the signature were unmistakable. The name printed in bold, undeniable ink beneath the signature line was not a faceless corporate entity or an anonymous banking official. Diane stopped breathing. The paper fluttered from her numb fingers, drifting silently to the kitchen floor. Charles and Gemma leaned over, reading the printed name that sealed their total financial annihilation. The holding company that had acquired the toxic loan, the entity that now possessed the legal deed to their home, and the corporate powerhouse freezing their every last cent, was owned and operated by Anna Anderson. The quiet, pedestrian woman they had mocked for her simple wardrobe had orchestrated their total ruin. The freelance data analyst they ordered to vacate a suburban home was the billionaire chief executive officer executing their bankruptcy. They had handed a $2,000 pity check to a defense contracting titan who now held their entire bloodline captive. The sheer, suffocating realization of my true identity crashed down upon them, leaving the treacherous family entirely destitute and waiting in absolute terror for my next move. The Baltimore field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation possessed a distinct and clinical aroma. It smelled of industrial floor wax, stale coffee, and institutional despair. My heels clicked a steady rhythm against the pale linoleum as I walked down the narrow, windowless corridor. Vaughn walked right beside me, his posture entirely transformed from the previous week. He had shed the ill-fitting slacks and the thick-framed glasses of the bumbling accountant persona he wore during our mediation session. Today, he wore a bespoke midnight blue suit, projecting the lethal, razor-sharp authority of a top-tier corporate litigator. We were not arriving as a frightened spouse and a confused numbers guy. We were arriving as the undisputed architects of a financial execution. A federal agent guarding the interrogation suite nodded to Vaughn, swiping a security card to unlock the heavy steel door. The mechanism clicked open with a harsh metallic thud. I stepped into the stark gray room. A single fluorescent fixture flickered overhead, casting cold shadows across the bare walls. Nathan sat at the center of a scarred metal table. His wrists were secured in heavy iron handcuffs, which were tethered to a thick steel ring bolted directly into the surface of the desk. My husband looked entirely unrecognizable. The rented tuxedo shirt he still wore was wrinkled, stained with nervous sweat, and missing its silk bow tie. His hair, usually styled with arrogant precision, stood up in unkempt tufts. The confident, swaggering regional director who had kicked my slippers into the mud was gone. In his place sat a hollow, terrified shell of a man. When the heavy door shut behind us, Nathan snapped his head up. His bloodshot eyes widened, flooding with a sudden, pathetic surge of hope. He genuinely believed his submissive, unremarkable wife had come to rescue him from his nightmare. "Anna," he gasped, his voice cracking, dry and hoarse. "Oh, thank goodness you are here. You have to help me get out of this place. This is a giant misunderstanding." I stepped forward, taking the steel chair opposite him. Vaughn remained standing near the door, acting as a silent sentinel, observing the impending wreckage. Nathan leaned as far over the table as the iron chains would allow. Tears spilling over his pale cheeks, he launched into a frantic, rehearsed narrative, desperate to spin his criminal behavior into a tragic tale of victimhood. "You have to believe me," Nathan pleaded, his breath hitching as he tried to construct a believable lie. "The pressure at the biotech firm was suffocating me. The executives were demanding impossible margins. I was lost. I was having a psychological breakdown, and Harper took advantage of my vulnerable state. She pushed me to buy things to secure that real estate to keep her happy. She manipulated me into taking shortcuts. I never meant to hurt you. I was just trying to survive the stress. I love you. We can fix this. Just hire a good defense lawyer and tell them I was not in my right mind." I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single word of comfort or validation. I simply unlatched the leather briefcase I carried and withdrew a thick, color-coded financial portfolio. I dropped it onto the metal table. The heavy binder hit the steel surface with a resonant smack, silencing his frantic babbling instantly. I flipped open the cover, revealing pages of meticulously organized bank statements, wire transfer logs, and encrypted digital receipts. "You were not manipulated," I stated, my tone smooth and freezing cold. "You were remarkably calculated. I traced every single dollar you stole from the federal grant allocations over the past 18 months. You set up a phantom consulting firm to launder the biomedical defense funds. You routed that stolen money to purchase a $25,000 diamond necklace for a woman you had known for a matter of weeks. You forged my signature on a deed of trust to secure a $3 million toxic bridge loan. Those are not the actions of a stressed, vulnerable employee. They are the deliberate maneuvers of a federal criminal." Nathan stared at the spreadsheets illuminating his hidden life. His jaw trembled as his excuses evaporated into the sterile air. "But I can pay it back," he stammered, clinging to a microscopic thread of denial. "I can sell the Chesapeake Bay house. We can liquidate the assets. I can make the firm whole again." "You do not own the Chesapeake Bay house," I corrected him softly. "And you never did." I reached into the interior pocket of my blazer and pulled out a clear plastic evidence sleeve. Inside the sleeve rested the reassembled remnants of a single piece of paper. I had spent an hour meticulously taping the shredded strips back together, preserving the jagged edges where the metal teeth had torn the document apart. I slid the plastic sleeve across the cold metal table until it rested directly beneath his chin. I watched his eyes scan the patched document. He read the bank insignia, the date, and the specific monetary value. It was a certified cashier's check made out for $150,000. I was holding this portfolio on the night of our 5th anniversary, I explained, watching the color drain from his face as he processed the numbers. Tucked behind that check was the fully paid title to a 50-foot luxury sailboat. I had intended to wipe out your consumer debt and hand you the keys to your dream vessel. I wanted to grant you the financial freedom you constantly complained you lacked. But you arrived hours late, reeking of another woman, and told me I was too pedestrian to fit your elite trajectory. You threw away a debt-free life purely to feed your own vanity. Nathan let out a strangled, breathless sound. He looked at the taped check, realizing the staggering magnitude of his mistake. He had thrown away a fortune because he wanted an influencer on his arm. He had sacrificed genuine security for a fraudulent illusion. But the true horror was only just beginning to dawn on him. He looked up at me, his brow furrowed in profound confusion. "How did you get these financial records?" he whispered, shaking his head. "How could a freelance data analyst access federal routing numbers and commercial loan documents?" "I am not a freelance data analyst," I replied, folding my hands neatly on top of the portfolio. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Protocol." Nathan stopped breathing. His eyes widened to an impossible degree as his brain tried to process the sheer scale of the revelation. The premier defense contracting firm that sponsored the gala. The corporate titan that awarded the subcontracts to his biotech employer. The untouchable entity he had been unknowingly stealing from for over a year. It was all me. He had not been embezzling from a faceless government bureaucracy. He had been stealing directly from his own wife. The woman he called unremarkable was the ultimate architect of the industry he worshipped. "You stole my money," I continued, letting each word land with devastating precision. "You funneled my federal contracts into your pathetic shell company. But you also made a far more fatal error when you applied for that $3 million bridge loan. The predatory lending syndicate you thought you were dealing with was recently acquired by my holding company. I approved your forged loan application. I own that toxic debt." Nathan shook his head rapidly, denying the reality crashing down upon him. "No," he gasped, the chains rattling as he pulled back against the steel chair. "That is impossible. You cannot own the debt. If you own the loan, then the collateral belongs to me," I finished for him, my gaze unyielding. "Because you triggered the fraud acceleration clause by forging my signature, my holding company executed an immediate foreclosure. I own the Chesapeake Bay property. I own the remaining equity in your biotech firm. And thanks to your secret cross-collateralization, I now hold the deeds to your parents' retirement estate in Bethesda. Diane and Charles woke up this morning to frozen bank accounts and an eviction notice. Your arrogant attempt to secure a waterfront playground just rendered your entire family homeless." Nathan let out a raw, agonizing wail. The sound echoed off the sterile walls of the interrogation room. A visceral manifestation of a man realizing his entire bloodline had been eradicated by his own hand. He had tried to outsmart a woman he deemed unremarkable, only to discover she was the billionaire architect of his total ruin. He possessed no assets, no leverage, and no future. But the trap he stepped into was deeper than simple financial foreclosure, and the mediation documents he signed in his hubris were about to seal his final, inescapable fate. Nathan continued to weep, the sound bouncing off the bare concrete walls of the interrogation suite. The heavy iron chains tethering his wrist to the steel table rattled as his shoulders heaved. He buried his face in his hands, attempting to hide from the staggering reality I had just laid before him. His parents were facing immediate eviction from their Bethesda retirement home. The sprawling waterfront estate he promised his influencer mistress was now the legal property of my holding company. The pristine illusion of his boundless success had been reduced to a pile of ash. But narcissistic survival instincts run deep. When the shock of his family falling into ruin subsided, A desperate, selfish calculation flickered in his bloodshot eyes. He wiped his face with the stained sleeve of his rented tuxedo shirt and sat up straight, trying to salvage a fraction of his shredded dignity. He looked at Vaughn, then back at me, his mind racing to find a legal loophole to escape the federal crosshairs.
"I can fix the ledger," Nathan stammered, his voice raw and grating. "I can hand the Chesapeake Bay property over to the government to cover the stolen grant money. I can declare corporate bankruptcy on my private consulting firm. The federal prosecutors will see that I am cooperating. I will offer full restitution. I just need time to liquidate the marital estate. You cannot take the suburban house from me. Half of that equity is legally mine under Maryland divorce law. I will use my half to pay for a premier defense attorney, and we will negotiate a plea deal." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cold metal table. The sheer audacity of his ignorance was almost fascinating to observe. I methodically began to dismantle whatever microscopic sliver of hope he still harbored. "You possess no equity in the marital estate," I stated, my tone unyielding. "I foreclosed on that property yesterday afternoon, using the very same fraud acceleration clause that doomed your parents. You have zero physical assets to offer the federal government. Furthermore, you cannot declare corporate bankruptcy to shield yourself from this specific theft." Nathan shook his head, a frantic denial taking root. "A limited liability company protects the owner," he argued, clinging to basic business concepts he barely understood. "The government has to pierce the corporate veil to hold me personally accountable. That takes years of litigation. I am shielded." "You were shielded," I corrected softly, "until you walked into a downtown law office for our divorce mediation and arrogantly threw your gold pen across the conference table." His breath hitched. The memory of that morning clearly flashed behind his eyes. He remembered strutting into the room, flanked by expensive attorneys, feeling like an undisputed king. He remembered watching me tremble in an oversized gray sweater, weeping and begging to be freed from his complex business ventures. "You were so eager to protect your private consulting firm from my supposed greed," I explained, watching the dawning horror paralyze his features. "You believed that shell company held your stolen fortune the key to your high society future with Harper. When I offered to walk away from everything, you eagerly signed a binding, irrevocable assumption of liability clause. You explicitly demanded that the paperwork sever me from your businesses entirely." Vaughn, standing silently by the heavy steel door, stepped forward. He unbuttoned his bespoke suit jacket and placed a single sheet of paper on the table, sliding it precisely in front of Nathan. It was a certified copy of the mediation agreement. The highlighted text glowed under the harsh fluorescent lights. By signing this document, Vaughn noted his voice a deep, resonant baritone. "You formally accepted 100% personal responsibility for all retroactive financial and federal obligations tied to your consulting firm. You voluntarily bypassed the corporate veil. You legally handcuffed your own wrists to millions of dollars in stolen federal defense grants. The Department of Justice does not need to litigate your corporate structure. You handed them a signed, notarized confession of personal financial liability." Nathan stared at his own signature on the premium parchment. The confident, looping strokes he had executed with his gold pen now looked like a detailed map to his own execution. The realization hit him with physical force. He could not hide behind his business. He could not sell a house he no longer owned. The federal government would not seize a phantom company. They were going to seize him. "I need my lawyer, Nathan," choked out panic rising in his chest like rising floodwater. "Call my attorney. He filed an emergency motion yesterday. He is going to get me out of here on bail. We are going to fight the mediation documents." I tilted my head, studying his frantic desperation. "Your discount divorce attorney officially dropped you this morning," I informed him, delivering the next devastating blow with glacial detachment. Nathan froze, his eyes darting between me and Vaughn. "He cannot drop me," Nathan insisted. "I signed a retainer." "You wrote a check for a retainer," Vaughn corrected smoothly.
A check drawn from an account that was frozen by federal investigators the moment your embezzlement was verified. Your attorney received a notification from his bank at dawn indicating the funds had bounced due to suspicious activity. When he realized his client was the target of a top-tier federal defense audit, he submitted a formal withdrawal of counsel to the state board. He wants zero association with a man who steals from the Department of Defense. You have absolutely no funds for a criminal defense attorney, I added, ensuring the reality of his situation permeated his thick skull. High-profile federal litigators require million-dollar retainers. Your bank accounts are locked. Your credit lines are severed. Your properties are foreclosed. You are going to face the full weight of the United States federal government, using an overworked public defender who likely received your case file 10 minutes ago. You will be a generic number on a crowded docket. Nathan slumped forward, the iron chains biting into his wrists. The arrogant executive persona had been entirely eradicated, leaving behind a terrified, hollowed-out shell. He had orchestrated a grand illusion of wealth and power, but the curtain had fallen, exposing an empty, destitute stage. Vaughn reached into his leather briefcase and produced a small, unmarked cardboard box. He stepped up to the metal table and slid the box across the surface. It stopped right at the edge of Nathan's chained hands. "Open it," I commanded. Nathan hesitated, his trembling fingers hovering over the cardboard lid. He slowly lifted the flaps, peering inside the box. His breath caught in his throat. Resting inside were the fuzzy, comfortable slippers I had worn on the night of our 5th anniversary. The fabric was stained with dark, dried mud from the rainy porch where he had maliciously kicked them. "You spent years telling me I was too pedestrian for your world," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. "You despised my comfortable clothes. You despised my quiet nature. You wanted a partner who thrived in the spotlight, someone who could elevate your status and match your boundless ambition. You kicked those slippers into the dirt because you believed you were walking toward a golden throne." I leaned closer, forcing him to look directly into my eyes. "You threw away a debt-free life, a loyal partner, and a secure future because your ego demanded a grander stage. You chose to fund your vanity with stolen money." The remaining fragments of his pride shattered. Nathan slid off the steel chair, his knees hitting the cold concrete floor with a dull thud. The chains pulled taut against the table as he dropped as low as the restraints would allow. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, his expression contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated begging. "Anna, please," Nathan wept, his voice a pathetic, ragged plea. "Please, I am begging you. On my hands and knees, you are a billionaire. You own the defense contracting firm. You have the power to make this go away. You can pay the restitution. You can talk to the federal regulators. I will do anything you want. I will sign whatever you ask. I will disappear. Just give me a fraction of your wealth to hire a lawyer. Please do not let them send me to prison. I will not survive in there." I looked down at the man groveling on the concrete floor. I felt no pity. I felt no residual warmth. The space in my chest, where a loving wife once existed, was now occupied by a fortress of unyielding titanium. I had given him every opportunity to walk away with dignity. He had chosen to forge my name and attempt to steal my home. The mathematics of his choices had simply balanced out. I stood up from the steel chair, smoothing the lapels of my tailored emerald suit. I looked down at his weeping form with absolute glacial detachment. "You wanted someone remarkable, Nathan," I stated, repeating his own cruel insult back to him, letting the words hang in the freezing air of the interrogation room. "Federal prison is a remarkable place for your boundless ambition." I turned my back on him. I did not wait for a response. I walked toward the heavy steel door. Vaughn gave the weeping man one final disgusted glance before following my lead. The federal agent unlocked the door, allowing us to step out into the quiet corridor. The heavy metal slammed shut behind us, the deadbolt engaging with a resonant, final click. Nathan's desperate, echoing sobs were instantly severed by the thick steel. I walked down the linoleum hallway, my heels clicking a steady, victorious rhythm. The execution was officially concluded. The parasite had been permanently excised from my empire. I stepped out of the federal building and into the crisp Maryland morning, breathing in the fresh coastal air, ready to return to the quiet, untouchable throne I had built. 6 months passed, bringing a crisp, golden autumn to the Maryland coast. The turbulent storm my former husband initiated had long since dissipated, leaving behind a sterile and ordered quiet. The federal justice system moves with a grinding mechanical efficiency when dealing with defense contracting theft. Stripped of his high-priced legal dreams, Nathan faced a mountain of irrefutable evidence. He accepted a global plea deal to avoid a public trial that would have exposed the sheer depth of his incompetence. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in a highest security federal penitentiary located in the stark, frozen plains of the Midwest. There are no tailored suits or luxury corporate retreats in his current reality. His days are measured by steel bars, regimented schedules, and the crushing realization that he traded genuine freedom for a cheap illusion. Harper experienced a different, yet equally devastating brand of justice. The night of the Maritime Gala, numerous defense contractors had recorded the dramatic federal raid on their smartphones. The footage of Harper dropping Nathan's hand, shoving the rented diamonds into his pocket, and sprinting out the service doors went viral before sunrise. The internet is a ruthless judge of character. Her carefully curated influencer brand evaporated overnight. High-end sponsors severed their contracts instantly, refusing to associate their products with a woman fleeing a federal wire fraud arrest. Her follower count plummeted, replaced by thousands of mocking comments. She faded into total obscurity, a forgotten footnote in a scandal she helped create. While Nathan adapted to the rigid confines of a prison cell, his family navigated a stark and unforgiving landscape. Diane, Charles, and Gemma woke up from their aristocratic dream to find themselves entirely destitute. My holding company executed the foreclosure on their pristine Bethesda retirement estate without a single delay. The banks seized Gemma's leased vehicles, and the local country clubs quietly revoked their memberships due to unpaid dues. The family that once prided itself on generational wealth and social superiority was forced to pack whatever meager belongings the liquidators allowed them to keep. They relocated to a cramped, drafty two-bedroom apartment situated in a gritty industrial neighborhood of Baltimore. The transition from sprawling, manicured lawns to cracked asphalt and roaring, elevated trains was a brutal awakening. To cover basic utilities, Charles took a job scanning receipts at a local hardware store. Gemma, stripped of her corporate credit cards and elite networking luncheons, secured employment folding clothes at a discount retail chain. The harsh reality of minimum wage labor quickly erased her condescending smirk. They lived in a perpetual state of exhaustion, learning firsthand how the other half survives. On a damp Tuesday afternoon, Diane stood in the cramped, dimly lit kitchen of their Baltimore apartment. The peeling linoleum floor squeaked beneath her sensible, worn shoes. She was unboxing a stack of cheap dishware, trying to organize the tiny space. As she reached the bottom of a battered cardboard moving box, her fingers brushed against a smooth glass frame, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. She pulled the object free, assuming it was a forgotten family photograph. She peeled back the tissue paper, and the breath caught sharply in her throat. Resting behind the polished glass was not a picture of Nathan or Charles. It was the exact personal check she had written in my living room 6 months prior. The $2,000 slip of paper was pristine and uncashed. Stuck neatly to the front of the glass was a small, bright yellow sticky note bearing a handwritten message.
Diane read the words, her hands trembling as a fresh wave of humiliated tears welled in her eyes. The note read, "For a cheap apartment in Baltimore, courtesy of Anna." She dropped the frame onto the scarred formica countertop. The heavy glass cracked, echoing the sound of her shattering pride. The crushing weight of her own hubris finally brought her to her knees. She had tried to banish me to the gutter with a condescending handout. Now she was living in that exact reality, forced to stare at the very instrument of her arrogance every single day. Far removed from the smog and noise of Baltimore, I stood on the sweeping wraparound balcony of my newly acquired Chesapeake Bay estate. The morning air was crisp, carrying the briny, invigorating scent of the ocean. Below me, the deep, dark waters of the bay rippled gently against the private, deep-water dock. The property was a stunning architectural masterpiece, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows and custom marble interiors. It was the exact waterfront compound Nathan had attempted to buy for his mistress using forged signatures and stolen federal grants. I simply purchased it outright, with clean, untraceable capital. I leaned against the smooth glass railing, holding a warm ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. I was not wearing an emerald silk gown or a sharp tailored business suit. I wore my favorite faded heather gray sweatpants and an oversized comfortable college shirt. The soft fabric provided the perfect insulation against the coastal chill. My hair was tied up in a messy, practical knot. I looked exactly like the unremarkable pedestrian woman Nathan had despised. Yet I stood as the undisputed owner of the horizon stretching out before me. Resting on the teak patio table nearby was an encrypted digital tablet displaying the upcoming quarterly expansion plans for Aegis Protocol. The firm was growing exponentially, securing new defense logistics contracts and acquiring specialized cybersecurity subsidiaries across the eastern seaboard. The empire was thriving, fortified by the meticulous, relentless discipline I had honed over a decade. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, bitter flavor. I watched a lone sailboat glide across the dark blue water, its white canvas catching the morning sun. The quiet serenity of the moment was profound. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystal-clear atmosphere of total peace. True power does not roar. It does not require a rented tuxedo, a flashy sports car, or a loud, arrogant voice commanding attention in a crowded ballroom. True power operates in profound silence. It is built during the late nights spent working in damp basements, fueled by sheer grit and unwavering focus. It is forged in the quiet moments when you choose to trust your own intellect rather than relying on the fragile, fabricated validation of others. For years, I shrank my own presence to accommodate a man who felt threatened by the very concept of competence. I wore plain clothes and hid my wealth, hoping to be loved for my character. I learned the hard way that shrinking yourself to appease the ego of a toxic partner never guarantees loyalty. It only invites exploitation. When you dim your own light to make someone else feel taller, you teach them that your boundaries are negotiable. If you are listening to this and you find yourself trapped in a dynamic where your worth is constantly minimized, where your ambitions are mocked, or where your comfort is treated with disdain, I want you to hear this message clearly. Never apologize for your brilliance. Stop negotiating your value with ghosts who offer nothing but empty promises and hollow criticisms. You possess an incredible, undeniable strength within you. Gather your resources. Build your fortress in the shadows. Do not waste your breath arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Step back, secure your perimeter, and let them underestimate you. There is a specific, unmatched thrill in watching a predator walk blindly into a trap they built with their own arrogance. It makes the final checkmate so much sweeter. Focus on your own growth. Build your empire on a foundation of unyielding integrity,
And always remember to let the trash take itself out. As I stand on the sweeping balcony of a quiet coastal estate, watching the gray morning mist roll off the dark water, my thoughts drift away from the triumphs of corporate warfare and hostile acquisitions. I do not dwell on the shattered egos of the men who tried to bury me, nor do I revel in the sterile sound of a federal holding cell clicking shut. Instead, my mind lingers on a much quieter, far more terrifying tragedy: the utter collapse of the American family structure. When you strip away the rented tuxedos, the stolen defense grants, and the spectacular financial ruins of these self-proclaimed titans, what remains is a profound cautionary tale about how we raise our children. The men who walk into our lives wearing custom suits purchased on maxed-out credit cards are not born with a hollow chest. They are carefully, methodically built. The roots of their betrayals lie in a parenting philosophy that infects so much of modern culture. A culture that frequently confuses the accumulation of status with the cultivation of character. Consider the illusion of the traditional family. We are led to believe that a two-parent household, rooted in generational wealth and country club memberships, is the ultimate incubator for morality. Yet, behind the manicured lawns and the holiday dinners, a different curriculum is often taught. We see mothers who excuse their sons' blatant infidelity, looking their daughters-in-law in the eye to claim that successful men simply have needs, and blaming a husband's wandering eye on a wife who wears comfortable sweatpants. We witness parents who happily harbor their son's secret double life, sitting around a table with his hidden child, while his lawful wife endures the silent, crushing agony of failed fertility treatments miles away. This is not family responsibility. It is the active breeding ground for sociopathy. When families operate without the foundational pillars of honesty and fairness, they raise children who view other human beings as disposable props. We see fathers who stand at podiums to publicly humiliate the women who married their sons, boasting about a superior bloodline, while secretly driving their own firms into total bankruptcy. When a child is raised to believe his last name or his superficial charm makes him untouchable, he grows into a man who will forge signatures, raid the pension funds of elderly clients, or commit federal wire fraud just to maintain an illusion of greatness. He learns that optics matter more than integrity. He is never taught to sit in the quiet, necessary discomfort of his own limitations. True parenting values require an entirely different architecture. Real family responsibility is not found in purchasing designer clothes or demanding reverse child support from an empire you did not build. It is found in the grit of a young mother staring at a bank balance of $14 while her premature son fights for his life inside a plastic incubator. True long-term guidance means working grueling shifts in silence, scrubbing floors, and learning predictive data algorithms at 2 in the morning to build an impenetrable fortress around your child. It means making a solemn promise that your son will never feel the sting of poverty or know the cruelty of a man who looked at a fragile infant and called him a burden. When you raise a child with that level of fierce, honest devotion, you do not produce an arrogant fraud. You produce a kind, empathetic prodigy who values the structural integrity of his world over the applause of strangers. This brings me to a truth that our society often finds deeply uncomfortable to confront. We are relentlessly conditioned to believe that a parent's ultimate duty is to provide a softer, easier life for their children than the one they experienced. We are told to pave the road, to remove the obstacles, to build a safety net so thick that our children never feel the harsh impact of the ground. I fundamentally disagree. The pursuit of an effortless life is precisely what breeds monsters. Unconditional love should never be confused with unconditional protection. By endlessly rescuing these men from their own shortcomings, their families engineered their eventual prison sentences. When a father returns after 9 years of absence, expecting to extort $30,000 a month by threatening to psychologically traumatize his own 9-year-old son at the school gates, we are witnessing the terrifying result of a man who was never taught emotional awareness or accountability. Protecting a child from the consequences of their actions is a profound form of parental sabotage. A parent's truest, most sacred obligation is not to pave the road for the child, but to prepare the child for a brutal, unpaved road. Loving a child means letting them fail. It means allowing them to scrape their knees, bomb their exams, and face the crushing weight of their own mediocrity so they can learn how to genuinely improve. If we shield them from the heavy, uncomfortable burden of fairness, they will shatter the moment the universe refuses to bend to their will. If you are listening to this, I urge you to look closely at the foundation of your own home. Are you building a sanctuary of genuine emotional awareness, or are you constructing a fragile glass house of ego? We navigate the darkest corners of human nature together here, finding the strength to rebuild our lives from the ashes of deception. If my journey through betrayal, corporate warfare, and ultimate survival has resonated with you, I invite you to join our community. Hit the like button, subscribe to Samantha Told Stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. As the sun rises higher over the bay, casting long, sharp shadows across the water, I am left with a haunting realization. We spend our lives terrified of the villains lurking in the shadows, warning our children about the predators waiting outside our doors. But perhaps the most dangerous predators are not the strangers in the dark. Perhaps they are the children we raise with too much comfort and not enough truth. When you build a king without teaching him the weight of the crown, you do not get a ruler. You get a tyrant who will eventually burn his own castle to the ground just to feel the warmth of the flames. Look at the faces of the people sitting at your dinner table. Are you teaching them how to survive the fire, or are you merely handing them the matches